by welcoming you on behalf of the C.G. Jung Institute of Chicago to this day-long seminar, workshop, conversation, colloquy. Um, uh, I'm Robert Moore, and I will be your instructor and your colleague in reflection today. And on behalf of the Board of Directors and Jackie Matfeld, the Executive Director of the Institute, I want to thank you for your support of the Institute's programs. As you know from your own experience, this is not an easy time for not-for-profit institutions. It's a hard thing to sustain any not-for-profit enterprise in our culture these days. And so that makes us even more appreciative of your participation in these programs. By your participation, you support the ongoing work of the Jung Institute and all the research and all the education, all of the attempt to create more consciousness and awareness, which the Jungian community worldwide represents. And so we're deeply indebted to you for coming. You should know that I come and do this as a labor of love. I don't receive any compensation for this. So your contributions to this workshop go directly to support the ongoing programs of the Institute. And so, as I said in the lecture, some of you were there last night. I said I'm one of those few extroverted Jungians. You know, a lot of Jungians are introverts. My friend John Giannini, who you may know, is one of our elder analysts here, our senior analyst, and he and I are both Jungian extroverts. And I was saying last night that an introvert gets their thinking very clear before they bring it out. An extrovert tends to learn what they think when they are talking about it with others. And so I said last night that I'm so indebted to all of the people that in this Jungian community who've come and conversed with me like we'll do today, because I really owe a lot of development of my thought over the years to this community and their willingness to come and think with me about these topics. And all these books and all these audio tape lectures and so on are a common enterprise between those that have attended and conversed, and my attempt to learn what we said and to put it into some kind of order and put it out for the public to be able to utilize. So this is a continuation of that. As you may know, I mean, just say a couple of things. If you don't know anything about me, there's a website which I would like you to be aware of and inform your friends about. It's www.robertmoore-phd.com. robertmoore-phd.com. And events that I am doing either in Chicago or around the world are announced on that, as are a lot of the available audio tapes and books and so forth that are available. And so I just want to call your attention to that. I'm a Jungian psychoanalyst, and as I'm fond of saying, I'm not a Jungian because I don't know any other theory. For many years, I've taught comparative psychotherapeutic and psychoanalytic theories, and comparative spiritualities, comparative religion, comparative mythology, and I consider myself to be a representative of Jung's tradition because I really believe that it is the psychology which is the most adequate to understand this incredible being, this incredible, horrific, frightening being that we human beings are. And I think you'll get a little sense for that today. I am a professor of psychoanalysis, culture, and spirituality at the Chicago Theological Seminary in their PhD center. And And I have a private practice of psychoanalytic psychotherapy and analysis and executive coaching in Hyde Park, out of Hyde Park. So I stay busy. My tendency is to be a little workaholic, but I love my work. So I'm happy to be with you today. And with an agenda that is the agenda that I envisioned for us, and so I feel very fortunate to have you all here. Let me, I will say more. Remind me later today to say more about some training of spiritually oriented therapists that I'm beginning to do around the country, and some programs in that. Remind me to make some announcements about that. But let's jump in here. What I'd like to do is to spend the morning going rapidly through yes, excuse me. They're up here. Everyone should have one of each of these if you haven't gotten them. And we're going to cover a lot of territory. And what we're going to try to do is to do the mapping, the theoretical and conceptual mapping, drawing upon Jung and trying to give it a little update through my recent work, and dialogue about the Jung's frame and how it's still centrally relevant to the things we face as persons and families and a world. And then this afternoon, I want us to come back and really engage in discussing your own experience to the extent that, or you can come up with a hypothetical person. So and so is experiencing such and such. Well, what would this possibly mean? And we will engage together on that sort of thing, because I'd like to move from the theoretical and the mapping, getting us a kind of an intellectual and conceptual geography of what's really going on, and then do some experiential sharing and reflection and working on trying to get more of a feel for applying this kind of perspective actually in one's personal life, and also when you're working with someone, whether it's teenagers or whether it's clients or college students or nuns, because that you'll see as we go that the challenge we share really integrates all. We're really all in the same boat with regard to what's going on. The title you had in that brochure, it does get at what I wanted to talk about, but it's different from what I turned in. And what you need to know is that this session today is part of an ongoing series, and so this is in a way we can treat it as freestanding, but you need to realize that this is a part of a fabric of a lot of work that I've been doing for quite a few years, and it's all available through the audio tape lectures and my books. But I have been working for some time in trying to do two things. One, to update Jung's scientific integrative psychoanalysis, because I really do believe it is the point of view in terms of psychoanalytic science, the paradigm which offers the best chance for us to have an adequate human science of the psyche, interdisciplinarily sensitive. In any case, the other thing that I've been doing is that over the course of the years of my work, I've come to the realization, which I have stated in a number of my books, that when the human beings decided they did not need to practice participation in their own mythic imagination, And when they got the idea that you would be superior intellectually, or that you'd be superior as a human being if you did not engage in any kind of spiritual discipline or ritual practice in the history of the planet. What happened, we're going to try to understand this morning what happened. There are great forces in the psyche of human beings. So what we're going to do is just talk about what I call Jung's Copernican in psychology. Pre-Jungian views of the psyche in modern psychology have tended to be based in a kind of an enlightenment view of the human. They have depreciated all kinds of mythic and symbolic discourse and ritual practice as superstition. When I was a young scholar and a young therapist, they were teaching us that all religious practice and all is crazy making, and they were teaching us that all ritual practice was obsessional. That is, there was a Freudian paradigm in interpretation of all these processes, which was based on a rather Enlightenment view of the psyche, so that the unconscious was really viewed as solely archaic. The theories that were sophisticated enough to have a view of the unconscious viewed it as solely archaic and related to that superstitious, pre-modern stuff. And so the attempts were made to understand the human psyche in terms of its being a kind of a machine. Kind of a machine model of the psyche began to emerge. There's an old book that tells the story of this. It's a book that's probably not still in print, but you could probably get it through Amazon. It's a book by Floyd Matson, M-A-T-S-O-N, called The Broken Image. And it tells the story about the increasing tendency to view human beings as sort of machines. And if they are functioning okay, they are well-oiled machines. And if they start to have dysfunction, they are sort of broken machines. This has been an increasing development, and one that continues in epidemic form today. I mean, the tendency to look at human beings as merely biochemical machines and to view them as nothing but that. And anyone who has a sense of any kind of transcendent meaning or any kind of sense of the meaningfulness of consciousness, that person is viewed as rather obscurantist and probably akin to those pre-18th century superstitious people. There you go. And so it's important for you just to get a sense, historical, for those of you who are you historians know this, but those who have not had the privilege of studying much history may not be aware of the incredible historical events that have led to a decline in appreciation of the importance of the spiritual dimension of human life, and also of the worth of human consciousness itself, and the significance of human consciousness and will and intentionality and the human sense of meaning. If you want to get a sense for what happened in Western religion, there's a book called I think it's called Christian Theology from the Enlightenment to Vatican II by James Livingston. It's another older book, but it tracks the increasing impact of secularization on religious life and practice in Protestantism and Roman Catholicism. In any case, there's been a huge trend. And what I did in some of my early work was to show how this decline of ritual knowledge and the decline of a sense for why it was necessary really got rolling very powerfully at the time of the Reformation. I mean, there were things feeding that already, but at the time of the Reformation, the iconoclasm, you know what that is? That's the attack on symbols and images, really got superheated. And there was a tremendous attack on any kind of ritual process. And it's very interesting to me that the rise of contemporary epidemics of addiction, compulsion, depression, and so on, the increasing levels of anxiety that range at all levels of our world and all levels of our society, including now research showing that the anxiety level in embryos is peaking out now. It's going up. So that trend that continues today really began to be accelerated at the time of the Reformation and really has continued to today. And the increasing dominance of technology and what Paul Tillich, the great philosopher, called the thingification of the human. Not a very elegant word, but that was what he chose to say, the thingification of the human. And Tillich was writing about that back in the 50s and earlier. And what he said about that it was uncanny how much he foresaw. It's gotten worse. So this is the background to the culture and the psychology that many of you studied in your undergraduate schools and perhaps even in your schools of social work and clinical psychology. Reductionistic theories of psychology, some of which didn't even have a theory of the self. Many of them didn't have much of a theory of the conscious mind, let alone the unconscious mind. And they were rat psychologies or pigeon psychologies or whatever. And so you've got to get a sense for that. There's a book that traces the history of the development of the psychoanalytic movement, which in a way has been an attempt to go back and recover the archaic dimensions, the deeper dimensions of human beings. And that book is a book by Henri Ellenberger, and it's called The Discovery of the Unconscious. And it makes for wonderful reading. It gives a history of Freud, Adler, Jung, the existential analyst, and so on. So anyway, but almost all of these other theories were what Ken Wilber today would call flatland theories of the psyche. You know, theories of the psyche which had neither much of a sense of a dimension of depth nor much of a sense of any kind of transcendence of the ego, anything which would transcend the ego. So many of these psychologies were psychologies merely of behavior. Then, even when psychoanalysis started with Freud, there were psychologies of an archaic unconscious that really didn't have much positive in it, but you had to learn to live with. And they were ego psychologies. Many people in doing therapy today were trained in what has been known as ego psychologies. That is, viewing the center of the psyche as being in the ego consciousness, that the main task in psychology is to develop the ego. And of course, that's an important agenda. There's no doubt about it. We'll talk more about that in a little bit. But when Jung comes along, there is a huge shift in a paradigm. Jung begins to argue that there is more to the psyche than just consciousness and the personal unconscious. The personal unconscious, that which you got in your family of origin, that which you got through the traumas you suffered as a child, that which you got through the particular birth order that you experienced in your family, that which you got through the particular way your body is. You know, that's personal unconscious dynamics, and certainly is important. But Jung began to understand that there is a deeper level in the human psyche that is inherited, that he believed a species-wide unconscious, and that in that unconscious, what later came to be called the collective unconscious or the objective psyche, there were huge amounts of coded information, huge amounts of a kind of archetypal template for human possibilities. And so, while he retained Freud's understanding that the unconscious does have extremely significant personal elements, and while he retained Freud's understanding that the unconscious expresses itself often in very archaic, we might call regressive forms, he believed that there were tremendous resources in the unconscious, and that there was a center. This is very important for those of you that have not studied Jung before, that there are actually two centers in the personality. The ego, Jung believed, was the center of consciousness, the conscious mind, and that it was certainly important to have an ego that could experience itself as centered and working properly. But he also said that there is a center of the entire personality in the collective unconscious. The collective unconscious has a lot of archetypes in it, but in the centermost part of the collective unconscious, there is what he called the archetypal self, and you can write that with a capital S, and that's what I've done here. You've got the conscious mind, and you can read that. That's what, that is we can think about it as the floodlight of your consciousness and what you're able to be aware of consistently, or what you're able to focus on at will. Now, Jung spoke of the ego in its relationship to this archetypal self. The archetypal self, he believed to be imaged in a lot of different kinds of images. And of course, if you studied Jung at all, you get a sense of the varieties of images of the self. The self appears in all sorts of guises, like to take a leaf from Joseph Campbell's notebooks. There are many masks of God. Well, there are many masks that the archetypal self wears. And one of the things we'll do this afternoon is try to think about what mask the archetypal self has been wearing as it has been trying to get your attention. But you can think of some images, anything that tends to symbolize the great center to human beings is carrying a projection of the self. And we'll think about some of those, but I'll just give you one. The image of the sacred mountain. The sacred mountain, the image of the sacred mountain exists all around the world. and it is the sort of primal image out of which all of these theories of the spiral come from. All of these, the imaginations of the pyramid that goes to the sky. All of those things are representations of this archetypal center. If you've ever seen a picture of the Islamic pilgrimage to Mecca, and you've ever seen a picture of the crowds circumambulating the Kaaba in their ritual process around the great black stone, you're seeing acted out a representation in projected form of the archetypal self. It's nothing more powerful than to see a film of that going on and realize the enormity of the archetypal energy constellated right there around the Kaaba, which is carrying the projection of the self. Those of you who've been involved in various spiritual pilgrimages or vision quests of any kind know that when you go on a pilgrimage, you're actually acting out a journey to the center, attempting to actually embody a journey to the center out there. If you may want to look at Victor Turner's work on pilgrimage, he's got some articles called the Center Out There. He's got a book on images and I forget what else in Christian pilgrimage. But anyway, and there's a lot of buzz today about the labyrinth. You may have heard. How many of you have heard of the labyrinth, walking the labyrinth? Well, you should walk a labyrinth sometime and you'll get a feel for this. When you're walking a labyrinth, that is a external representation symbolically of the archetypal self and one's attempt to relate to it consciously and in a reflective manner. Does everybody get that? Okay. Yes. The labyrinth. If you'll get on the internet and Google labyrinth, you will find enormous resources on the labyrinth. And a lot of people are using the image of the labyrinth and the actual walking of the labyrinth to actually get this into their body, to reclaim some ritual process in terms of relating to the archetypal self. They've even got little boards, little wooden boards you can buy, and you can take your finger and you can go through the labyrinth and you can meditate when you're going through the labyrinth with your finger. People are very creative and have a lot of ingenuity about these things. But if you study comparative culture, you're going to find this everywhere in pre-modern culture. Pre-moderns understood that there's a center out there and that you need to relate to it. And you need to relate to it respectfully first. You need to learn to respect it, and then you need to learn, as we'll see later today, to commune with it. So in any case, what I've done in a number of these seminars is to lay out all the plumbing for this, and I've done a number of seminars here on Edward Edinger's work. I've done seminars on the sacred space and ritual process. They address this issue. But the important thing in terms of understanding Jung's Copernican revolution, that is to say, you can think about it as parallel to the shift from Ptolemaic views of the world to Copernican views of the world. That is to say, as long as you think the human ego is the center in the psyche, you're still functioning, we Jungians believe, in an outmoded understanding of the inner world. And Ptolemaic views of the earth and its relationship to the sun and the planets and so forth, they had some practical uses. You could still navigate your boat using that. I mean, you could navigate around and sail your boat around using a Ptolemaic view of the world. But there are limits to what you can do with a Ptolemaic view. And the progress of science had to finally accept Copernicus's discoveries. And in my personal view, that's what's going to have to happen in psychology, because there's enormous amounts of evidence that the ego is not as much the center as it thinks. And Jung was the one who really reclaimed that ancient intuition that there is a center out there. Recently, I gave a number of workshops. Let me just say how they relate to what we're talking about today. I did give that thing on Edinger to give some of this plumbing we're going to go over very lightly this morning. And then I gave one called Transforming Fire, in which I discussed the enormous powers in the archetypal self, which I'll refer to again later today. But if I confuse you, you can go to those lectures called Transforming Fire, optimizing your access and regulation of archetypal energies. Some of you I know were here for that. And then I gave a workshop, which is going to be available very soon, on the archetype of sacrifice, and in which I pointed out that in the ancient world, almost universally over the world, throughout the world, people understood the importance of sacrifice. And here's the way it worked. I'll just summarize it. No matter what tribe, they usually understood that, number one, there is a primal other with a capital O. There is a primal other, number one. Number two, it wants something from me and from us as a tribe. Number three, they assumed that if I'm going to have a halfway workable life, I'm going to have to try to give it something of what it wants. And all over the world, they had different fantasies about what that was and what it took. You know, that's where human sacrifice came from. That's where all the animal sacrifices you hear about. There's a lot of animal sacrifice going on today, Santeria and so forth. But if you get to the bottom of the role of we're going to talk more about the role of the archetype of sacrifice in the psyche today and what it really means. And that's what I was addressing in the last part of that seminar. And that archetype of sacrifice seminar really leads up to this one today. Because what I essentially concluded with in that seminar after describing the practices of sacrifice was to say that all of those ancient practices was an intuition about a great presence. So when I say practicing the presence, the archetypal self in the synchronistic life, I'm talking about Jung's discovery psychologically that there is a great presence that is in the psyche. It's not out there, but it is in the psyche. And the ego that doesn't know that has got some problems. And we'll get into that in a minute. But anyway, so in ancient sacrifice, they knew there was a great presence. They knew it wanted something. They knew that they needed to give it something if their life was going to be not totally chaotic. And what I suggested, building on Jung's works and insights, is that was an ancient intuition of a psychological reality that Jung, in his Copernican revolution, got into the realm of theory. Yes.
Thinking about the Copernican revolution.
Yeah.
To pick that up, do you see some help coming from science in general?
Oh, yes. Yes, indeed. Yes, indeed. Well, I can't get into that deeply. We've got so much ground to cover, but I think there's a lot of of developments now in contemporary science which we need to reflect upon and dialogue with as we try to move psychology forward. And there are many of them coming out of recent brain research. I spoke to that last night in my lecture if you weren't there. I talked about what I think needs to be done to take Jungian psychology forward into this century. And it's related to that, the looking at these various scientific resources and the kind of isomorphic parallels, the parallels that we might use to stimulate our thinking. But one of the main things is there's a lot more awareness now among theorists, ranging from the Bowen family systems theorist right over to one man I admire so much, and I recommend you look at his work, called Daniel Siegel out at UCLA, and one of the research institutes out at UCLA. Outstanding psychiatrist who's bringing together all the interdisciplinary research on the brain and on what comes with us in our brain inheritance, and what the community needs to do and what we need to do in order to make sure that our children's brains develop adequately. And even, for example, today we need to realize that you gotta help your brain develop. Even if you're as old as I am, you got to help your brain. Your brain is still developing connections. And a lot of what we have to do is to help the brain, consciously help the brain find new connections. The research is showing that is actually not only possible, it's necessary if you're going to be dynamic and vibrant and vigorous and optimize your personality. And we'll talk more about that later. But one of the things that's quite clear from the recent evolutionary psychiatry research is that there are a lot of powerful instinctual agendas. You don't even have to call it archetypal if you don't want to. There are powerful instinctual agendas in your biological inheritance that are going to discharge. Some of them are going to discharge in unbalanced ways. Others are going to sleep like the great Kundalini snake until you wake them up. In other words, in you, here's the vision of the psyche that I think we need to claim. In you are all sorts of amazing potentials, and they are codes for different potentials that you have as a person. Some of them in your early development in your family life, some of them were overstimulated for reasons we can chat about later, and therefore are overworking and making you a little crazy. And others are still dormant, so asleep, and have not actually been evoked and nurtured and blessed enough. And I invite you to think today about which kinds of archetypal potentials, I'll give you a few pegs to put those on later, but which archetypal potentials have been running hot in your psyche, and which archetypal potentials are still kind of asleep, and you may not even think you have it. Because that's very important for reasons that we're going to be talking about. In that great presence in your psyche are a lot of potentials. In fact, your most radiant creativity potential and your most radiant creative potential, your most creative erotic potential, your most radiant capacity for effectiveness, your most radiant capacity for your clarity of vision and intentionality, without which you will not have enough vitality. That is all in the archetypal self. How much of this power and energy and potential does your ego have? Nada. Nada. And you know, people are often surprised that they're so fatigued and so tired and so bland and so flat and so uninspired and so resigned and so nihilistic and cynical and so forth? Well, that's because they're expecting the ego to come up with it. And guess what? From a Jungian point of view, your ego is not going to come up with it, no matter how good your family was, no matter how much of a rich, privileged family you grew up in, no matter how innately talented you are. They don't just automatically come online, those things. And they're archetypal anyway. Are you with me? You get that? Okay. So now I've got a few other terms here I want to just run through quickly before I take a few questions and we take a break. Now I have put a little of my own extensions of Jung's thought up here. Jung really talked mainly about the ego and the archetypal self, and he talked about, of course, complexes and those sorts of things we can talk about later today if you want to. But in response to recent developments in psychoanalysis, I've tried to point out that in addition to your ego consciousness, each one of us is in a struggle to develop what I call, following Harry Stack Sullivan and Heinz Kohut and others, I call it a system self. A little s, system self. This is what Heinz Kohut talks about as the nuclear self, or the hope, the possibility in you of a cohesive self, little s self. Now that is not the archetypal self. Some people get confused between the two, but it's not. Let's put it this way. Here's a simple way to think about it. In the archetypal self, and one of the diagrams we'll go over a little bit later, in which I have put out my decoding of this, there is a kind of a blueprint, a psychological DNA, a map of the possibilities and potentials in that great self in you. But it is potentials. The system self actually has to be built like a pyramid. You've got to block by block lay that thing down. It's like building a house. Your actual system self is, think about it in terms of system theory. That's why I call it the system self. Your personality functions as a system. If you're having a lot of personal problems dealing with your personality, no matter what form they take, your system self has not yet attained adequate creative organization. Do you follow me? You think about everything is made up, whatever else they are made up of what we call today in science natural systems. Your body is comprised of a number of natural systems in cooperative relationship. Your psychological life functions, in my view, in natural systems which are made possible by the cooperation of all of those natural systems in your biochemical functioning. So you are an amazing, we got to think about what you are. You are an amazing cooperative community of natural systems in an elegant tuning. Already, even if you're a mess, even if you're really just a mess, the fact that you're not dead is I'm serious about this, is an amazing, Paul Tillich would say it's miraculous expression of creative organization. Yes. Oh, yes. The brain you don't have a system self if that brain is not getting organized. In fact, there are a lot of people walking around that are incomplete. The system self is so shaky that it can't maintain, it just struggles to maintain itself as a system at all, much less a tuned system. Think borderline personality disorder. They don't really have an integrated system self in the sense of a good enough integration in the system self. So everyone that is awake, even to a small degree, has an ego consciousness. Not everyone has a functional system self. It's functioning, but if there is a tremendous amount of dysfunction in the personality and in its relationships, it is having a terrible struggle. And what is the goal? This is what I try to teach psychotherapists. Always, and it applies to you and me, always ask the question, don't just look at symptoms. Symptoms are just sort of like flashing lights on a dashboard. Ask yourself, what is happening to this system self? How well is it doing? How much of the walls have been put up, and how many 2x4s have been left out? Or if you're thinking about building a pyramid, how many of the blocks on that pyramid have not been put in the right places, so it may not be stable? And that's the system self. The system self needs to be built on the model of the archetypal self, the map, the architecture, the architectural drawing of the archetypal self. The ego needs to be assisted in working as well as it can and turning up its levels of awareness, because your ego consciousness can get better. That's part of what the day is about. Today I want to contribute to having your ego consciousness get better at noticing how your system self is doing and asking what the adequacy of your system self, how that relates to your relationship to the archetypal self. Because I'll tell you one last thing before we take a little break. If you're having a lot of problems in your system self, or if anybody you're working with, a teenager, or a client, or a student, or a colleague, is sort of manifesting a lot of chaotic stuff, their system self is really having a lot of fragmentation anxiety. Take it to the bank. If they're having a lot of fragmentation anxiety, I can tell you for sure, without any doubt whatsoever, that their relationship to the archetypal self that is the chief factor. So when people's system self is not functioning well, it is because the relationship to the archetypal self is not conscious, and it is not respectful, and it is not regulated. So when I speak of practicing the presence, the archetypal self in the synchronistic life, I'm simply trying to carry forward Jung's vision of how you're going to find optimal sanity first. Good enough sanity first. Envision optimal sanity. And then envision moving toward something more radiant than that. So that's what we want to think about. When I say practicing the presence, I'm underscoring the importance of being aware that the person I'm talking to right here, the ego consciousness, you're not the archetypal self. But the archetypal self is looking at me through your eyes. It's in there too. Now, if you know that, then you're a little bit ahead of the game. If you don't know that, that's what we got to work on. And when I get down here about discerning the dragon's presence, we're going to be talking about what are the marks of recognizing what the archetypal self is doing in you and to you, so that you can start trying to be a little more of a better friend to the archetypal self. Okay? Now I'll take I'll take one question and then we'll take a break.
Could you explain fragmentation?
Yes, there has been an increasing understanding in contemporary psychoanalysis, not just Jungian psychology, actually widely ranging, that when the system self begins to vibrate too much because it's not integrated creatively, that the person will experience a lot of anxiety. And their defense mechanisms, if they're lucky enough to have functioning defense mechanisms, will begin to try to deal with that. And a lot of what we see in ourselves and other people's, when think about what you're like when you get anxious, and think about what you do to cope with that. And so what you need to realize is that when you start feeling anxiety, and it's more subtle than this, we have to get into it this afternoon more, but when you start feeling depersonalization, when you start zoning out, notice when you're in a meeting you start to zone out, or you start compulsively yawning. Notice when you start compulsively yawning. You may just be tired, but you can also be overstimulated by something, and the system self not prepared to handle that level of intensity. And so there are defense mechanisms that will begin to cause you to zone out. Are you with me on this? They'll cause you to start causing you to zone out, and they'll start causing you to shut down, detach, go away from the meeting in your mind, put your Android in to sit there. So anyway, that's fragmentation or disintegration. They call it fragmentation anxiety or disintegration anxiety. That is, if you're experiencing a rush of anxiety, your system self is struggling. Okay? It will cause the kid to act out. In fact, if you don't have a lot of ego development, and if there's not much of a self system integrity, all right. Well, let's continue. I'd like to walk us through these diagrams and talk about how this relates to what we've been talking about. And I'll try to refer different things. This first diagram, the archetype of initiation, this one. There are two diagrams from the archetype initiation book. These are both in the archetype initiation book. And it is about the archetypal system which is constellated anytime you're going through a transformative process. In a way, your whole life pilgrimage is a transformation process. But it's important to realize that at some points, the whitewater intensity of transformation from one state to another is far more pronounced and is far more dangerous. Anytime you have a crisis in your life, a life crisis, whether it's a predictable crisis such as adolescence, midlife, retirement, the children leaving home, any of these predictable life, family life cycle, personal life cycle crises, this archetype will be stimulated. It's almost as if your body knows that this is needed. And when that thing is stimulated, you will start looking for a sacred space, And it may be the seashore, it may be the mountains, it may be a 12-step group. You'll start looking for, it may be a psychotherapy or analysis. It may be a spiritual community. But you'll be looking for a sacred space for containment for your molting process, for the shedding of your skin, and the preparation for the new life. It's a very difficult but normal process, and it's repeated throughout your life. It also happens whenever there's an unexpected trauma, such as severe illness, death of a loved one, divorce, loss of a beloved job or career, loss of a dream that you had, a major dream for the future, loss of a dream that you're in a relationship with someone that you really had tremendous hopes that might develop into a future, and something happens to just make it clear that that's not going anywhere. And this is what we call grief process. So you can plot grief process on this. All transformative process in all forms of therapy can be plotted on this chart. And it's very important to know this, because when this thing gets stimulated in your psyche, if you don't know about this, you can really start pathologizing yourself terribly. You start thinking, oh my God, I'm going crazy. And it feels like you're going crazy, but you're just molting your skin. You're just going from one stage of a caterpillar to another stage. Now, that doesn't mean it's not dangerous. This is a very dangerous period. This is why not only are you seeking a sacred space, you're actually seeking containment, and adequate containment usually requires a ritual elder, a magus, a magician figure. It can be a AA sponsor, any 12-step sponsor. It can be a pastor or spiritual director. It can be an old wise friend. It can be a psychotherapist, a counselor. It can be a weird and crazy person that you meet in some weird and crazy place. That is to say, this is an archetypal process, and depending on someone's capacity for theater and drama, some very unlikely folks can often step up and accept the projection and actually carry it. So this is why there have been a lot of transformative things happen out of encounters with sort of mad folks. But I don't recommend that. But you just need to know that when that kicks off, there's going to be something in you that's looking to idealize someone in the role of a magician figure. And that is because you need someone to hold the center point in a projection while you are going through the chaotic aspects of the womb of the tomb and the tomb of the womb. So if you'll look at this mythic cycle, realm of the magician as transformative space, this is adapted from, I've adapted this from Joseph Campbell's Hero with 1,000 Faces, which you ought to review in the context of what we're talking about today. That's where this idea of the call, that wasn't what I chose to title this, but it's relevant, because whenever the archetypal self gets sick of where you're fixated, it's going to precipitate something happening. And depending on how stubborn you are, it can precipitate it more or less violently, more or less in a more or less dangerous manner, in a more or less adversarial manner. That is to say, if you're real sensitive that there's a great other, it may not take as much to get your attention. If you're really a blockhead, you know, really unpleasant things may have to happen to get your attention. But when he got that thing, the call to adventure, well, that's a euphemism. It's like something comes in and intersects your ordinary, the world that you're just taking for granted. Yeah, this is like hitting bottom. That is to say, something intrudes and whacks you, and you cross that threshold into the center space, the sacred space. And of course, that's why you need a magician to help you not go off the deep end and get lost during that. You need your Gandalf, or the female counterpart of Gandalf during that period. Yeah.
I'm just curious about it. Does the musician, the shaman, the priest,
Yeah.
do they have to be aware that you are using the folder, or does that have to be communicated?
That's the question. Does the magician or the ritual elder figure, the magus, have to be aware that this is going on? Well, let's put it this way. It's a lot better if they are, and they are principled, morally mature people. Transformation. See, we humans are so good at recruiting. We will recruit somebody to play the role we need them to play. And you'll notice this with children, how if you're available emotionally, they will, the ones that have got resilience, will recruit you to play the role they need you to play for their development. And if you're sensitive, you can kind of tell what's being requested by the little organism. You know, that's what transferences are. Transferences are attempts to recruit you for an archetypal dance that the system self needs in order to go to a better level. Are you with me on that? Okay. So if a person that, there are a lot of very intuitive, primordially wise human beings in this world, some of them with very little education. And they have been organized in such a way that they intuitively go to this place. You study comparative culture, you find these types of individuals in all cultures. They are sort of shamanic individuals. They are medicine people. And it's an archetypal phenomenon. They couldn't write you an essay. Some of them are illiterate. But where we want to go in the future, as I said in the foreword to my dragon book, we need a new kind of magi in the world. And they need to be conversant with all this ancient wisdom, but they need to bring the best in contemporary science as a part of their equipment in order to do this optimally. We never do it perfectly. There is no analyst and no therapist that is sensitive enough and strong enough or mature enough to be optimal all the time. And anyone that thinks that they are simply grandiose and not regulating very well. That's right. But the point of it is that you hope that the person that you recruit in this stage has got some wisdom and some moral maturity so that you're not exploited in your vulnerability And it's always a question, as we've seen in recent years with therapists, with clergy of various traditions, and I mean all of the traditions, from Buddhists to, the people that get possessed by the magician archetype and then start to act out their lover shadow with their people they're working with. That's all acting out. It's not a mark of anybody that's a real magician at all. It is a mark of someone who's inflated in this archetypal image, if you know what I mean. Okay, so anyway, review that wonderful Campbell book, and then look at the Archetype Initiation book and the resources I've talked about in there to get a sense of this is the geography of our lives. More or less ordinary, regulated, established geographies for a while, and then something is going to happen, and we're going to need to find the sacred space again. Hopefully, we will get to the point where we always know where it is, and we don't let it get too far away, and we practice it on a regular basis. And that's what we're talking about today. Okay, now, to go to the Edinger diagrams, there are two of them, the big circle and the one with the little circles merging. Here's the way to think about it. Not only does, when the archetypal self is tired of the arrogance of the ego, it's going to try to push you over that first threshold. And I hate to tell folks this, but it is, as Jung said, a lot like the Old Testament God. You know, that is to say, it intends for you to pay attention. And the less respectful you are, the more drastic things are going to happen to push you over that threshold. When you are over that threshold, the tendency among humans, all the evidence shows this, the tendency is to have much more of a sense of the other, the transpersonal other. In that space, in that sacred space, think if you're in a 12-step program, which I'll address in a little bit more. If you're with the kind of mature practitioners in 12-step programs, they are going to try to get you dealing with your finding a new humility and getting in touch with the higher power. Read that higher power that they're talking about, the ones that know what they're doing, as a sense of that primal other, that primal presence that is not the ego. Addicts are one very primal example, and we've all tend to have our compulsions. If you listen to my archetype compulsion and healing tapes, you'll see how compulsion is a lot more common than we want to admit. We all have our compulsions, but those who are just eaten alive by compulsions are living very close to the fire of the dragon energy, and they don't know it. They mistake themselves for it, and it eats them, and it doesn't like to be ignored. So anyway, the hope is that in this transitional phase, there will be a cultivated sense of the great presence. In all cultures, you see this. In the transition state, there's more of an awareness that the ego is not the center. After the transition state, after the new learning has occurred, hopefully, if there's a mature magician, they help you move into a next phase of hopefully creative adaptation. Now, hopefully, in my view, you will have learned something from this experience and this experience. Because if you didn't learn from this experience and being in here, then the chances are that very soon the train is going to come and run over you again real soon. And there are some people that have difficulty with pattern recognition, and they do this, and they do this. Oh, I'm not kidding you. Listen.
No, I believe it's just a unique
Well, after you got to laugh and cry. I mean, because if you care about people and you see what they do to themselves all the time, and they don't know. I mean, they really, like Jesus said, forgive them, Father, because they know not what they do, and it's really true. But it's our job to help people wake up so that they get the patterns and they realize that, oh, I should have learned something in here, so that the train doesn't have to run me down the next time, so at least so quickly. And so anyway, but hopefully then in the third phase, I would hope now with modern psychotherapists who don't understand, who are flatlanders and who think everything's about the personal psyche and think it's all about your ego function or about your inner subjectivity with your mother, or they think it's all. Now those things are important, and I appreciate that, and I study it a lot. But give me a break. Give me a break. Poor mother. The problem was that you didn't know the difference between her and the dragon in the first place. And if you're still having problems with your family of origin, it's because you still haven't learned the difference between your parents and the archetypal self. And this is where you need to study Edinger, which gets me to Edinger. Edinger's books are an absolute banquet, and you can read them again and again. He's like a rabbi. He's not a theoretician like me. He doesn't really want to tell you about his theory too much. In fact, it was after his death that finally this little book called The Science of the Soul was published, which I want all you to get and read. It's a little book. Darrell Sharp and Gary Hartman edited it, did a wonderful service to us by bringing this out. It's a little book about 100 pages, and it's called The Science of the Soul, published posthumously. And it's more theoretical than any of the other things. But his works are incredible compendiums of commentary on text. And the one that I love the most is his Ego and Archetype. And that should become a companion for you. You should make that book a companion. And these two diagrams are from that book. And what it's doing, it's expressing what Edinger imagines as the maturation process. And what I would like to do is just to note that this is the developmental process toward maturity. In childhood, the child is in a fusion state with the great self. My friend Malidoma Some, West African medicine guy, says that child is still remembering the world of the ancestors. It's participating in the great cosmic consciousness, But it has not begun to have its little s self system evoked and blessed and nurtured and brought online yet. And so that's that first. And as the child's archetypal potentials get adequate welcome, adequate evocation, adequate blessing and nurture, that incremental, what we like to call in the fancy psychoanalytic language, microstructuralization, baby steps of development, carefully overseen by loving and supportive adults who are not too gratifying, but gratifying enough. That little I begins to come out of there and begins to differentiate from the dragon within. And as the maturation process goes, and of course, this is a continuum, and it's not a straight line. We wobble through this trajectory, and if we had adequate interpersonal and community resources and cultural resources as we are maturing through childhood and adulthood, then we move into a greater sense of what Murray Bowen called a differentiation of the person from the family system. You can actually think about Murray Bowen's theory directly parallel to mine. He's doing a family systems and organizational systems thing, but his concepts of fusion and differentiation are very, very parallel to what we're talking about. When you're in a fusion with the archetypal matrix, you're also likely in a fusion with your family of origin. And the members in your family of origin are carrying the archetypal projections. You don't have a clue who they are as human beings. They are still archetypes for you. You follow me?
So Bowen's looking at the outer world and you're looking at the inner world.
Well, actually, that's not quite fair to Bowen, because Bowen does have a sense of the self as well. His idea of the pseudo self, which is generated in fusion states, is parallel to the concept of the false self that we use in psychoanalysis, and it would be related to that pseudo self would be what we would call a personality with that is too identified with a thick persona, which has been generated to please other people and not to be oneself. See, to feign personhood rather than differentiating and individuating. Actually, Bowen's concepts of differentiation, his differentiation scale, in this book I'm working on, I'm going to have a little section in there where I essentially say the same thing, that if you plot that differentiation scale that Bowen uses, and then you plot the idea of moving from a fusion with archetypal matrix to a differentiated ego self axis, you're really talking about the same process. And so, but in any case, Murray Bowen is a very honest man. He's always said, he always said, I'm not very differentiated. And he would kind of probably put himself in here, maybe here on bad days. Murray Bowen was more honest than most analysts I know. But in any case, look at this image of the idea of go. Now, Edinger was a crusty old guy and absolutely brilliant, but not the most warm and fuzzy guy in the world. And Erich Neumann, who's another man I admire greatly, you should look at that Origins and History of Consciousness book of his to get a kind of a classical Jungian predecessor of what I've been trying to do. They talk about the ego self-axis, the ego-archetypal self-axis. Well, notice that there's differentiation there, but there's a line. That indicates relationship. Now, that's a little wooden as a concept, and what we're really talking about, we have to talk about today as friendship. First, fear. Second, respect. Third, if you're making progress, friendship of unequals. And finally, for those of you that are really interested in the upper reaches of spiritual possibility, communion. Communion. What is possible here in kind of the upper reaches of your potential is a real ongoing communion between your conscious mind and the great self, the dragon. That is, in fact, possible. There's a lot of evidence that that is so from human history. There are statistics, statistically speaking, it's a small percentage of humans, but in terms of numbers, there are sufficient numbers of examples of people who live in a kind of communion with that great presence is significant enough for us to know that it is a human possibility. And if you take seriously the trajectory that contemporary research is taking, it is evident that this is coded. This potential for our species was reached quite a long time ago. But the cultural and spiritual, the knowledgeable cultural and spiritual supports for bringing that out have declined in recent centuries. But I think it's very hopeful to know that a state of conscious connection, if we're going to talk about practicing the presence of the archetypal self in the synchronistic life, that's what we're talking about as a possibility for you. Now, I'm not a romantic Jungian. I mean, I know how scary all this is, and I know how, there's a lot of things that stack the cards against your being able to do this, but that's no reason not to try. I gave a set of lectures recently called The Courage to be Transformed, and it takes a lot of courage and to keep on keeping on this. Okay, but anyway, and this diagram is also from his Ego and Ego and Archetype. That was a paraphrasis. Ego and Instinct is another wonderful book by Daniel Yankelevich and William Barrett on the best and ego psychology leading up to Erik Erikson's work. But it's Ego and Archetype I'm talking about. This is the round that Edinger sees happening to us all the time. And that is, as a child, you're in merger with the dragon, and with that great self. And a child is actively inflated. That's what it means to be a child. That's their job, to be actively inflated. And then gradually they have to be let down from this, hopefully gently. I like to say, let the child down from the high chair gently, slowly. Because if you try to take them down too fast, you'll not be able to help them mature. It's got to be incremental. And gradually, and this is a process which Edinger is modeling, he's modeling this for adults, that when you really get in touch with the dragon energy in yourself, you are going to feel a little inflated. You're going to feel full of yourself. You're going to feel, oh, wonderful. You're going to feel really good. You're going to feel really smart. You're going to feel really beautiful. You're going to feel really lovable. You're going to feel, you're going to feel really potent if you're a male, or, the female version of that, You're going to feel all these ways in which you get lighted up by the archetypal energy when you are in that connection, that connection with these energies. But if they light you up beyond a certain point, either your internal defenses or the external world, like you'll become too wonderful for your own good and somebody will shoot you down, of course. Or as Robert Bly, my friend, says, you show too much of your gold to envious people around you and they'll try to stab you in the back or something to bring you down, and then you go into a depletion and depression. See, you start feeling alienated from your wonderfulness. Why did I ever think I was wonderful? I'm an idiot. I'm a loser. The world would have been better off if I'd never been born. This is the manic depressive cycle. Edinger's message here is, we're all a little cyclothymic. We're all a little manic depressive. And the so-called manic depressive are just folks that are a little more loosely organized, whose cycling is a little bit more pronounced, But we all cycle. So what we want to do in individuation is to get you to the point where when you get to moving away from that inner sun, you don't move quite so far. And when you fly back up close to the sun in your Icarus mode, that you try not to get quite as close. This is what I love to call tuning. Tuning. Optimizing the sort of the bandwidth of the wave of your oscillation. See, the way that you're relating to the great energies. Now, if you'll think about your life over the lunch hour, and you think about where you typically fly with regard to these great energies in the psyche. Do you normally fly out there in the realm of Pluto somewhere, out there where it's cold and you can pretend there's not a sun? Or do you fly in there in the Mars? Are you kind of closer in the Mars circuit? Are you a fire person who's always running hot? Are you a person that cycles? So you need to think about these things, because what's that got to do with what we're talking about today? Somebody tell me. What's that got to do with what we're talking about today? That's right. I mean, it's telling you about your relationship to the archetypal self. Your typical consciousness is constellated in forms that has a certain trajectory with regard to the great center in the self. Remember, the great center in the self. That's why I've started using. I've drawn on this ancient mythic image of the dragon. It was a synchronistic event when my Facing the Dragon book came out. Just as it came out, there was an article in. I should have brought it for you. There was an article that came out on the science page of the New York Times. I don't know whether did any of you see that? It was a report on dragons on the science page of the New York Times. I think it was in April, and they announced, they had this article, this comprehensive article about how universal the image of the dragon is in the human species, even in those places where they had no reason to have any sense of a dragon, that they believe now scientifically that there's an inherited image of the dragon that's in the collective unconscious. And they said, this seems to be reminiscent of Carl Jung. Surprise, surprise. And I had just this book where I'm arguing that the archetypal image of the dragon is that primordial image that human beings have always known there's this great thing. It is very huge. It is alternatively, depending on where you live, wonderful and the source of all blessing and creativity and prosperity, or the source of all horror and something you need to kill. And so I talk about that in the book, but I thought it was wonderful synchronicity that just as this thing was coming out, they were announcing Jung must have known something. But they had no idea what the meaning of it was. Well, I think that the meaning of it is clearly, this is the face of the archetypal self. It's very important to use that image too, because more than any other image of the archetypal self, it communicates a certain truth. Watch yourself with this thing. Don't be cocky. This is not the gentle Jesus, meek and mild, of the pietistic literature. This is not an anthropomorphism. This is not a human thing. This is a huge, powerful, incredibly fire-breathing being and our entity. And so humans have always had a sense, and there have been two takes on it. Any time that you're aware of one, they're going to create chaos. If they're coming around, they're going to create chaos. That's the Beowulf traditions. And then there are the Eastern traditions, which include the idea of respect and devotion, but in which the presence and energy of the dragon is celebrated at festivals continually. Yeah, go ahead.
Is that maybe Job? Is that Jung's concept of Job?
I think that if you look at Answer to Job, that is the stuff Jung is working with, and all of Jung's thing about his fantasy about the God image. It's quite one thing I think is quite clear, that if you're taking an arrogant stance, either an arrogant stance in denying this thing exists and trying to live as if it does not exist, then it's going to look very much like Yahweh. And there is such a thing as wrath. That is to say, there are consequences for disrespectful treatment of this great thing in the psyche. Inevitable consequences. There's some subtleties to this that I don't have time to go into today, but I will say this. I disagree with the classical Jungian position that this thing changes, that it changes when the ego changes its attitude. I don't think it ever changes. I think it is what it is. And I think what happens is that when the ego consciousness is in denial or in a disrespectful relationship with this thing, either by denying it exists or by identifying with it, like many addicts in their flamboyant, hell-raising roar phase are in total identification with it. You know, I'm wonderful and I can drink all the Jack Daniels in the world and be the most charming person on the block and have no consequences, you know, that sort of thing. But anyway, so after hitting bottom, as you said here on the chart, for the tape, this is from Ego and Archetype, and it's the circle of the round that Ettinger puts in there. There hopefully will be a moment of awakening and awareness of that one has been arrogant, that one has experienced hubris, and one now needs to repent of that hubris and attain, look at that, a sacrificial attitude. Ettinger doesn't, he talks in a brilliant way about the sacrificial stuff in that book, but he doesn't come right out. He's very opaque. He doesn't come right out and tell you, look, folks, you need to understand that this thing wants something from you. And basically, I'm just going to try to tell you what is between the lines in Ettinger. And what it means is, sacrificial attitude, that's just not just an attitude. You actually have to give the great self something. What? Respect. What? Acknowledgement. What? Symbolic offerings. And we'll be talking about that this afternoon. You actually need to, for example, I will often say to my analysans, if they have a particularly helpful dream, and it gives them some image that they find enormously helpful in understanding what's happening to them right now, I will say, well, might be a good idea if you did something to symbolize to the self that you get it and that you appreciate it. And you come up with what that would be. For example, if they dreamed of a green snake, and this symbolized life in the dream and new life for them, and they looked into the snake imagery and all that, and they saw connection with the primal source of life. Say, what could you do to acknowledge to the archetypal self that you appreciate the gift of this image? And this is just a hypothetical example. They might go and begin to look for an image which might represent that thing that was given to them to keep in a special place. And then in their reflections and dialogue with the archetypal self, say, I'm getting this for you, to say thank you to you for this gift. This is the beginning of what the ancients all did. All of them did. They always tried to bring respectful acknowledgement through gifts that are carefully thought out gifts. And so that would be an example. So it's not just an attitude. It's actually becoming aware that actual respect for something this great and this powerful requires some ritual acknowledgement in terms of action, behavior, offering, It might be nothing other than consciously buying a copy of Streetwise. And as you do it, saying, this is an acknowledgement of what you did. Even something that small can be very meaningful. You read me on that? Okay. Now, so then one has a sense of humility, and then there is a reconnection. The alienation with the great self begins to be mended. This is like the restoration process in self-psychology when you've had an alienation or a breach in a relationship. When there's a breach, there are repeated, in the actual spiritual life, you will experience a series of alienations and reconciliations with the presence. And that is to be expected. But you need to know that it's up to you to try to show the kind of attitude that's necessary for reconciliation. And that's what Edinger's trying to point out here. And according to Edinger's round, then you go right back into the inflation just like you were before. I hope not. I really hope not. That's what living the synchronistic life is about. If you begin to learn from experience, you begin to learn, well, maybe I will not get as completely deaf as I was before. Maybe I will start trying to pay more attention to the signs, reading that synchronistically, of what my great friend is trying to say to me. And so this diagram is Edinger's diagram, the one that says breakdown of a religious projection and stable state of a community of religious believers. This is a dramatization of Edinger by the way in which traditional religious communities carry the projection of the self carry the presence of the self in projected form, and thereby making it possible, easier for people to relate to it without being overwhelmed by its energy. Think about this as the experience of having the primal energy of the archetypal self carried in the figure of Christ or Mary. If you're Roman Catholic, in the host, in the Mass. If you are Indian, Hindu, in the figure of Saraswati, the great goddess. I work with people who are sane today, sane and productive because of Saraswati, because of devotion to Saraswati. And persons who have every right, according to all of our understanding of trauma and developmental problems, persons who have every right to be completely a disaster, but in fact are not, because of coming to a devotion with Saraswati in early life, which is continued to this day. And so this actually has been the history of the human species. In modernity, this, for people who've become culturally modern and lost any sense of ritual or spiritual practice, as Jung says, and you know Peter Berger's book, The Sacred Canopy, the collapse of the sense of the other world, and then the fall of all of that archetypal energy into our personalities, which makes us crazy. Either we completely shut down and become depressed, or we start acting out in all these bizarre ways that we're doing today. But in any case, if you're in a very traditional Jung used to say contained in a very ancient tradition, then you would have less of a problem about overwhelming energies from the archetype self. Often the tribe becomes very grandiose, but the person, the individual, is not. And I write about that in the Dragon book. And so your tribe can do horrific, grandiose, insane things, but you as an individual and your self system, you function okay because the tribe is carrying the projection of the great energy. You follow me? That's tribalism is one of the classic means that human beings have sought to manage their grandiose energies without benefit of consciousness. With the onset of Jungian analysis, the human species has a new possibility. It is possible to understand the plumbing of what's going on. It's possible, not as Jung in some ways naively thought, and Edinger, that human beings can manage all this energy without benefit of mythic and symbolic structures. Essentially, without, if you're really advanced, you can do that. Basically, I think a truly postmodern view would understand that what we've got to do in modernity is get past the fundamentalist containment in any tradition, but continue using the symbolic vessels in a conscious way to help us regulate these archetypal energies and to help us use those various resources from the wisdom traditions to help us consciously relate to the dragon through all of the different dialects of dragon language. And there are all these different dialects in the human species in which they've tried to speak about the dragon. And our species is such that any time we speak about the dragon, we get some of it right and some of it wrong. All human spiritual and religious language is idolatrous. How could it not be? Because you're trying to speak of something that can't be said. But human beings have to speak. And so the next step in human spiritual evolution is to understand that we must go ahead and speak. And then we must have a new humility. We must understand that our religious language, whatever it is not really adequate. But we do the best we can. And we accept the fact that the reality is much more than we can say in any spiritual language. And that is at the heart of all of the great prophetic traditions on the planet. Because all of the great prophetic traditions knew that you finally could not master it. And that anyone who thought, no matter how many PhDs they have in theology, or how many imprimaturs they have from any religious ecclesiastical body, no one is master of it. And so there's another option. This is the pre-modern option. This is what moderns try to do. And then there needs to be a third sheet out here, a postmodern, truly postmodern option, in which we participate in the mythic imagination while still knowing that it is myth. That is to say, you engage in dragon talk, and you know that it is seen through a glass darkly, and you make it as your offering. We can talk about that more later. But there should be a third sheet, and Edinger just has these two. But you get my drift. So anytime you're in a transition state, you're going to be closer to the dragon energies. Hopefully more consciously. And the good news is it gives you an opportunity to tune and to try to find a closer conscious relationship to these energies. When we come back this afternoon, I'm going to very quickly run through
sort of the process of developing your consciousness on this matter. First, with becoming aware of this reality. Secondly, facing what a big deal it is. And that takes a lot. And then third, realizing that it's going to take you a while to really learn anything like communion. But the first thing is just to work on conscious living with this reality in the psyche. And one of the things we'll do is say, well, how are you experiencing this presence in your life now? That is to say, are there particular symptoms that are compulsive for you? Because in my view, that would be a manifestation of its presence, of its unacknowledged presence. And then finally, I'll just talk about this kind of idea of communion, which would be actually getting better at practicing the presence in your daily life. And then we're going to talk about our experiences and think about various resources, okay? I've got enough time for someone to ask a question. Yeah.
I have a question.
Mm-hmm.
When you're talking about the progression of this diagram,
Mm-hmm.
this one,
Mm-hmm.
and you're saying that that the evolution of that.
I'm just saying that go ahead.
So, with the evolution of that, is what you're saying is that the evolution of that you would work with that energy and use the symbols, knowing that they are representations at best.
Yes.
Best that you can
That's
create.
Right. That's right.
Consciously, is that correct?
That's right.
Is that what you're saying?
It as I say, it is simply an attempt. What we need today is a partnership between science and very, very awake spiritual practice to try to stay humble, both through science, to try to stay humble through science, not arrogant through science, which is always a problem. But try to use scientific inquiry to keep us humble scientifically, and to use a kind of an awake humility in our spiritual practice so that we avoid the thing that humans usually do, which is they become legends in their own minds spiritually. And they believe their own press. And my religious tribe is the only one. And if you don't become a Wahhabist Muslim, then we should nuke you. Or if you don't become a fundamentalist Christian, we should suppress you. Or you can fill in the blank. In India, if you don't become a fundamentalist Hindu, I never believed there could ever be fundamentalist Hindus, but lo and behold, Murphy's Law, right? I mean, if it can go wrong, it will. And lo and behold, we got a virulent form of fundamentalist Hinduism now in India that's threatening nuclear war with Pakistan and trying to foment it. We must wipe out all those mosques. Yes. And so the scourge of the human species is this malignant tribalism. It takes all sorts of forms. It takes ideological forms, as you can see, Edinger's secular deities. That's ideologies. Nazism is one. Capitalism is one. Anything can become a reigning ideology that is lighted up with archetypal energy and is a false god. And so the challenge is to reclaim those ancient prophetic traditions which understand, and I think Jung's psychology really helps with this, to understand that the ego is never going to be able to master the self. It's never going to be able to say, I understand the self. Because if you ever get to the point where you say, even after I teach you my structure of the self, you got to understand that this is the map, this ain't the territory. And this is sort of like the primal understanding the intentionality between iconoclasm. There is a legitimate impulse under those old iconoclastic movements, you know, the anti-symbol movements, because it's a sensitivity about idolatry. But they're not empathic enough for us humans. We have to make symbols. We have to try. That's what we do. And we've just got to keep our sense of humor more about this. So let's take our lunch break now, and let's take an hour, and let's start promptly in an hour from now, and do a little once-over on stimulating some reflection on your part about where the archetypal self, the great presence, the primal other is manifesting in your life. It is manifesting in your life, I will guarantee you. And so just let me lay out just a few things here about our agenda for the afternoon, and then we will quickly get into thinking together about your experience of these energies. And first of all, now I'm being rather bold, some might say foolish, to go directly to this topic. There are those who would say that that a lot of people should not be exposed to the knowledge about this other presence in the psyche for fear that it will destabilize their personalities. There are a lot of folks that argue that and would think me irresponsible for trying to alert everybody. Here I am taking the great gnosis and casting it out to the winds, you know. My answer to that is people need to know about this presence. To the extent that they're already crazy, it's because of this presence. And it's because that they don't know about it. Therefore, if they don't know about it, then there's nothing they can do to try to say, gee, I'm sorry. I did not mean to be merging with you in a disrespectful manner. And so and my attitude about this is forewarned is forearmed. And so if you know that there's this great thing in you that is extremely powerful, and if you're not careful, will make you psychotic. In fact, in my approach to things clinically, I think more people are closer to psychosis more of the time than most psychotherapists think. And that's why we do so much to shut ourselves down. And this chronic attempt to shut down and flatten our lives out is because there's some inner wisdom in our defense mechanisms. There's something inside us that knows that there's something very powerful in here and that we're not really very prepared to acknowledge its presence, so we just get depressed. So we just get flat. So we just get ordinary. So we just get detached. So we just get withdrawn, or so we just get drunk or something. But it's not because there's not some inner knowing that's that's below the threshold of ego consciousness. See, the ego, as Freud understood, and many Freudians have made a great deal of, there's also a sector in the ego function that's not at all conscious. It's the sector of the ego defenses. And I'm discovering in my advanced years that I'm a lot closer to Freud than I would have ever dreamed in my fundamental apprehension of things. I do believe there is indeed an it. That's it. The it is the dragon. And I do agree with Freud. There is an Über-Ich that is experienced, an above I that is experienced. That is also the same structure. Freud did not understand that, but it's really the same structure. It just depends on the position of the ego with regard to that structure. If one is identifying with the id, one is acting out like mad. I mean, really acting out. Really flamboyantly. And a manic state. If you are in an alienated place from it is adversarial toward you, and you're experiencing what Freud called a punitive superego. But Freud was wrong about the actual structure of this. There is one great system in the psyche that is both tends to possess the ego consciousness if one is not alert enough and make one act out, or it is rejected, pushed away in an arrogant way by the ego, in which case the adversarial energies, the critical, the inner critic, the scathing inner critic that tells you, this voice, this self-talk that you hear in your head that the cognitive psychotherapists are so concerned that you deal with. Well, they're very right to be concerned about this. Because but what a lot of them don't know is that that's not the ego creating that self-talk, that negative self-talk. It is the dragon and its punitive superego manifestation that is creating the horrifically negative self-talk. And so when you have anyone or you know anyone that's having a lot of suicidal fantasies, it's very likely coming off of the adversarial communications from the it. So in any case, I think I think we must be bold in this time. We must let people in on the gnosis, the most important gnosis that they will ever encounter. And the most important gnosis, or primal knowing, is to know that there is this presence in your psyche that is not you. It is not you. It is not you. And that's why I think it's important to use some mythic image to help you remember that we're not talking about you. Because I often find people that when you use the word archetypal self, even though if you study Jung and Edinger, it's quite clear it's not you. But a lot of people are so narcissistic that it is very difficult for them to understand that the archetypal self is not you. It's not you. It's in there looking at me, just as you are, but it's not you. And for you to think it's you is a big mistake. And it creates psychopathology. And for you not to know that it's in there, you unwittingly, you are unconsciously grandiose. You don't mean to be. You haven't decided, today I'm going to get up and all day I'm going to be a grandiose idiot. You don't do that. But if you don't know about this presence in you that is so enormous and so powerful and so loaded with archetypal energy that if you've connected with it too quickly, you would be psychotic, maybe terminally psychotic. There's not a person in this room who could not become terminally psychotic if you learn too much about, if the dragon showed you too much of its presence. Remember those stories about Moses on Sinai? What did Yahweh do to protect Moses? Somebody tell me. Yahweh shielded Moses from direct impact of its presence. And so all these folks around that think those crazy people over there are in danger of being psychotic, boy, that's arrogant. All of us have our hands full not going there. That's why we have so many funny little weird symptoms. And that's why so much of our libido, so much of our creative energy goes into symptoms and compulsions and preoccupations and procrastination and dysfunction and all that sort of thing. Because these are all wise mechanisms the psyche has to help you not fry in archetypal energy until you can kind of get waked up. And so the first thing is simply learning about this great, you can call it all kinds of names. I mean, you can call it instinctual energy, like the evolutionary folk talk about it. You can talk about it as biograms, energy-laden biograms in the psyche. You can talk about it as the id. You can talk about it as superiority complexes in the psyche. You can talk about it as kundalini energy.
Could you call it the devil?
In its negative manifestation, you could call it the satanic presence in the psyche. In my Facing the Dragon book, I talk about the Lucifer complex. And when your ego consciousness is not aware of this thing and respectful, the bad news is this: it's going to manifest as a Luciferian complex. It's going to be it's going to be adversarial. You're going to experience it as adversarial to you, a la Freud's punitive superego. And Jung kind of thought that it changed, that it was two-faced. And if you study those sections in there about when he talks about Mercurius, we're talking about Mercurius here. If you get the alchemical volumes and you look at the alchemical vision of Mercurius, we're talking about Mercurius. It's very careful not to be seen until a person's ready to see it. But it's always giving little signs that it's there. See? So in any case, it's important to know about this, and it's important to ask, and in the last part of the Facing the Dragon book, and what I'm going to work on this year is this Riding the Dragon, which is about what we're talking about today. Practical stuff that you need to know about trying to practice the presence of the dragon. I must lift up the name of Brother Lawrence here, the medieval person that wrote Practicing the Presence of God, and simply say that in theological terms, that's what you'd be talking about. Or if you were a Buddhist, you'd be talking about practicing the presence of the Buddha nature, or the true person of no rank within. In Hinduism, you'd be talking about the Atman in your personality. There are lots of ways to symbolize it, but the important thing is there is a primal other. That's the great gnosis. And the question is not, is it in me? It is. The question is, how is it manifesting? So that means you've got to start working on discerning its presence. How does it manifest in me? And what are the typical ways that its presence, that it tries to make itself felt in my life? Maybe I'm kicking and screaming not to admit it, but what does it do? And so Facing the Dragon is simply beginning to realize that this thing is a lot bigger and more powerful than you thought. When I speak of developing a friendship with the dragon, I don't mean that attitude that's sort of like some of these pious Christians, these pious country gospel Christians who say, me and Jesus got a good thing going. Sort of that kind of arrogant familiarity with the divine personage. That's not what I'm talking about. I'm talking about an acceptance of the idea that this is a psychic reality, or if you wish, a spiritual reality, which one needs to develop an ongoing, lifelong, at least, relationship with. And it has the potential of being the most important relationship in your whole life. And for you Christians who know a little church history, think Augustine here. If you cultivate a relationship with it, your relationships with humans in the outer world will not get worse. They will get better. In fact, to the extent that you're having severe relationship problems with humans in the outer world, it is very likely a mark of the shall we say, lack of development of the relationship with the inner being. So after facing the dragon and realizing that this is not something to be chummy with, or to have a romantic attitude toward, like some of the folks that have a romantic view of the archetypal self, that it's always friendly, that it's always, going to do something that makes your life better. Ooh, that's not the way it is. It will certainly do that if you're relating respectfully and even lovingly to it. But if you're disrespectful or denying its existence, it's not a happy camper. And there will be signs that it's not. And so living with the dragon would be that phase in which you finally get clear that you need to work on this. You need to discern where these energies are present, and that you've been unconsciously merging with it in a disrespectful way. And I'll show you some ways we do that in a minute. But what is possible, you see, that would be the realm of 12-step programs. 12-step programs, basic 101 spiritual practice. Takeoffs and landings are, for you football fans, blocking and tackling. Like basic, let's start working on my spiritual discipline. And I have no fantasies that I am a spiritual master or anywhere near getting to be one. But that is the important stage of working on. What does it take for me to learn to do the basics of relating in a respectful way to this great presence in me? We'll go down some of the things in a minute. But that's not the whole story. Even for an alcoholic, or even for a drug addict, or even for someone who has been manic depressive, or even for someone who is borderline, for example, I really do believe that the common element behind severe disorders is disturbances in the systems at various levels, the natural systems in the personality at various levels, that make it very difficult to create a vessel where this energy can flow and be returned to its source, So in that archetype of sacrifice class that I just gave, I talked about how as you develop your system self, take that last diagram now, the one on my work. This is in the back of the Facing the Dragon book, along with other diagrams. This is what I believe to be the actual geography of the coding of the diamond body. Jung believed that the archetypal self had a crystal-like lattice structure. And he toyed in some of his works with an octahedral shape for this thing. And in the course of my research, this is what I have. This is my attempt to say what I think the code actually is. Now, if Jungian psychology is a religion, then I'm being sacrilegious to talk about this. But since I believe it's a science, it's my duty to try to shed more light on the structure of the self. And this is what I believe the structure of the code is. There are 4 basic portals, 4 basic archetypal images in men and women that are the key lines of development. Yes, excuse me.
You know this self that you have here in the center.
Mm-hmm.
Is that the same as the dragon?
The whole pyramid, pretend you're looking down on the top of Chichen Itza, the Mayan pyramid, and there's a temple on top. That's the top. You're looking down at the top of that temple at the top of the Mayan pyramid. There, that's an image of integration in the human self, that image right there. That would correspond, remember when I had up the system self. That's the system self. That's an achievement. The smallest self. That's where you're trying to get to. You're trying to use the code of the whole pyramid. That pyramid, in my view, is an externalization, just as the dragon image, in my view, is an externalization of a sense of the living personality of the great self as a living being. What the biblical tradition talked about is the living God, not something can be controlled. This is based on the same principle. I think that pyramids, particularly the Mayan pyramids, are representations of the coding for the individuation, the integration, the centering process. You have got to take 4 different kinds of 4 different manifestations of archetypal energy, and they've got to be brought into a creative tension. They can't be merged. They can't really be integrated in some simplistic sense. They have to be held in a creative tension like this. Here are the energies coming from the different quadrants. And energies coming from this quadrant. The need is for there to be a creative tension between them that makes possible a higher development. And it's like, think about weightlifting. It's like you've got to develop the muscle systems so that they can hold a tension, like so. And so the capacity of you to develop a system self with enough, shall we say, structural integrity in it to hold its system function. That requires you to be able to stand intensity. You have to be able to stand the intensity of not resolving things. You've got to hold the tension in your personality between your aggression and your eros. If you can't do that, you got problems. And you have to be able to hold the tension in your personality on the other axis between your cognitive, mental, critical functions, which require detachment and contemplation, with the royal functions which have to do with saying, I decide, I wish, I envision, I say, I am, I will. So a person who is invaded by archetypal energies from that royal sector, either male or female, will be a very dominant personality. They will have a great deal of trouble being empathic or submissive appropriately. They will be compulsively dominant and be extremely disturbed when you do not submit. A person who is flooded with archetypal energies, the energies of the dragon, through the magician quadrant, will typically be a deconstructionist. They will depreciate things. They will see through things. They will have a bah humbug attitude toward things. They will tend to detach from involvements. The detached pathologies in psychopathology are the mark of a flooding of that archetypal energy through that portal. People who have a trouble with regulating their aggression are experiencing flooding or inadequate regulation of the warrior, the manifestation of these energies in their warrior through the warrior portal. So if you're a person that tends to browbeat your partner and to verbally abuse your spouse or your intimate friends or your children or your coworkers, you're in a merger with the archetypal warrior manifestation of this dragon energy. You don't know that you're not the mighty great warrior. You act as if you're a warrior god or goddess and not a human. You follow me on that? If you are being flooded with archetypal energies through the lover portal, you will be preoccupied with your feelings, your pain, your wounds. You will disavow responsibility. You will try to give it away in idealizations of others. You'll give away your power. You will have a chronic habit of saying yes when you should say no. You will overvalue the other and undervalue yourself. Does that make sense? Do you see that? Now, what is important to realize is that each one of those manifestations and varieties on that, you can listen to my tapes on the collective unconscious and psychopathology and my tapes available here called Archetype, Compulsion, and Healing, and you can get a more detailed sense of the forms that these invasions, these mergers, these fusions with the dragon in these forms takes. And what we want to have you thinking about is, how do you typically merge and lose your boundary with the dragon? See, it's not real respectful to think you're the dragon. Do you get that? I mean, if you sort of act like you are the great magician, or you act like you're the great lover, have to have sex with everyone, you know, a lot of people have that problem. Or if you think you're the great royal one and you have to lord it over everyone, and you can never listen to anybody, you're always the one doing the talking. These are all dragon sign, I call it. You got to get where you can read the dragon. Yeah, go ahead.
You seem to be suggesting, I just want to
Okay.
That if you're experiencing the dragon energy in one part,
yes,
pathological magician, causing your life to be pretty awful.
Right.
Are you suggesting that the focus then, the conscious focus, should be on the opposite side of the?
There's a couple of things you have to remember as you seek to get in a more cooperative and creative relationship with this great energy. One thing is, the first thing you want to see is you want to discern if there's any obvious way that you are sort of flooded with this dragon energy in a certain form. Because you know that if you are, that means you've lost your boundary with it in that sector. Now, what he was just saying, does that mean you need to put energy into the opposite quadrant? That is a goal you need to move toward. Sometimes, for example, if you are a person who is flooded with lover energy, often you will present as a very lazy person. And if I tried to get you to move immediately into highly organized activity following Stephen Covey's 7 Habits of Highly Effective People, you would terminate. You would simply think that I had gone completely mad, and you wouldn't want to talk with me anymore. So while the goal really is to awaken the deep shadow component that's being also not respected by being ignored, sometimes, in fact, very often, people have to get functioning better in their magician sector before they can do anything behaviorally, because a lot of the time they feel totally overwhelmed by the request that you engage in behavioral operations. Some people cannot follow your suggestions to do behavioral enactments that would help them yet. They can't do it yet. So in principle, you're absolutely right. You want to figure out, you've got 2 goals in your individuation process. One, you want to figure out which elements of the 4 elements, I think these are the 4 elements, which of these are not being adequately included. And you need to have a personal treatment plan, a spiritual and psychological treatment plan, in which you make an actual plan to honor each of these altars. In the ancient world, it's very fascinating. They actually knew that each different god or goddess had a different altar, and that all of them had to have sacrifices. They knew something. Each one of these 4 forms requires adequate sacrifice. You follow me? And so the first thing is to think about, this is what, if I were working with you, I would spend some time trying to come to a structural diagnosis. I would try to figure out where the most prominent imbalances are, and we would start thinking about a plan to try to engage that. So that's one part. So, and I spoke of this in the Archetype of Sacrifice tapes, where I said there's an alchemical model for the transformation process. And first, everything's a mass of confusion, massa confusa. You don't know that there are any elements. Then you become aware, you delineate the 4 elements. You know there are 4 elements. The next step is to balance the elements. When the elements are balanced, an inner temple manifests. An inner temple begins to exist. Read that. That's what I mean by the system self. You actually have an inner vessel which can give you the opportunity actually to encounter and channel archetypal energy intrapsychically, consciously. You follow me? Okay. Then there's one more step. In the alchemical text, it says, the adept then begins to do his or her actual sacrificial work in the inner temple. And I think what we need to understand today is that means that you want to take any excess archetypal energy that is flowing into your psychological vessel, and you want to return it respectfully to the Great Self, consciously. When Jesus said, "Give us this day our daily bread," I think that's a very wise saying. If you translate it like this, give me this day the amount of archetypal energy that I can creatively utilize and regulate. And don't give me any more than that, please. And if I find myself having any more than that, I'm going to make sure that I consciously offer it back up to you in my inner spiritual process. You follow me? So there are two processes trying to balance these energies, creating an inner vessel, the system self. That's the way you create a system self, in my view. And once you have a system self, then you can actually stand having more energy available consciously. In other words, you won't have to stay as depressed. If your system self is functioning, it can contain more fluid, the elixir. It contains more of the elixir of life without fragmenting, if the elements are balanced. But there's a catch. The archetypal self is the gift that keeps on giving. And when I taught Christopher was teasing me about this, when I taught the archetype of sacrifice, or the transforming fire, I can't remember which one I had a pitcher of water, and I to make that point, I just started pouring into my cup. And then I said, and the archetypal self keeps on giving you more energy. This is the catch. Once it fills up, it keeps on pouring. That's why Freudian therapies and all these ego psychologies cannot finally help you, because they don't understand that. They think that once it gets to where it can be filled up, now the therapy's finished. Well, the problem is you can have a fantasy, you're done, but the archetypal energies keep pouring in the precincts of your personal self. And if you don't know what to do with them, you're going to be regressed very quickly. You're going to be inflated, because anytime it begins to overflow, my cup overflows. Anytime that cup begins to overflow and you don't know where the overflow is supposed to go consciously, you're going to start having symptoms again. So that's sort of the scenario for this process. If you can get to the point to where you can optimize the amount of energy you can hold and use creatively in your life, and the more you get to where you can let that cup fill up, the more radiant you're going to be as a person. You are going to get, as you get more respectful of the dragon and know it's not you, you will get more radiantly human, and you will carry a lot more charismatic energy. You will carry a lot, you will have a lot less problems with depression. You will have a lot less problems with compulsion. But you need to remember, you're going to have to get rid of the excess. You don't want to keep it. You try to keep it. You follow me? Anybody doesn't get that? You see what I'm trying to get at? If you try to claim that that's yours, like so many artists make the mistake, they start really being in the zone, and they start doing wonderful paintings or wonderful sculptures, and they start claiming that they're a great artist. And that's the beginning of the end. If you've seen the movie Pollock, you see that deterioration coming. Yes?
I have two questions.
Sure.
The first one is, obviously these forces have been present throughout the course of time and
exactly.
for human beings.
Yes.
However, I'm curious as to how you feel that has changed versus, in terms of the amount of that presence or the lessening of that presence in our current time.
Yeah. Let me just address that. She's asking about what changes occurred in terms of the ancient world and in our time. The archetype itself has not changed. Probably in the last, since we've become human, since we have become this species, and we know a lot about that now, about when we became what we are in the last big development. The wiring for this has not changed. What has changed is that until the first axial period, which was long about the time of the Buddha and Isaiah, human beings lived in relatively small groups, and they developed, they evolved incredibly sophisticated mythic and ritual vessels to contain this energy in projected forms. They lived in projection. And it worked very well to contain this energy. They were very respectful. They feared the Lord, so to speak, all of them. And in the actual period, we began to have access to agricultural production, and we began to have city-states, and it required specialization. And you begin to get a role differentiation where these different archetypal responsibilities were farmed out to the military, you follow me, to the executive branch, so to speak, the king and so forth. And you began to get a differentiation. That was the beginning of bad news for the human species, because you can't farm out your warrior energies to somebody else. You have to be the manager of your own aggression. You can't farm out the lover energies to the artist. You can't farm out the magician energy to the professors, and so on. It all needs to be integrated in you. And yet we went into this big role differentiation, which caused the first kind of splitting. And then that was the beginning of nasty stuff, as we gradually lost touch of an internal integration of these things. And as the secularization process has continued, we have continually jettisoned all of this ancient ritual knowledge which they had developed to control these energies. So nothing has changed in the internal psyche, but the cultures have gotten dumb and dumber about ritual means and symbolic means of regulating this. Now the problem, I'm not romanticizing pre-modern cultures, in that they tended to use a lot of acting out of ritual processes, scapegoating rituals, and turning the other tribe into to the sacrificial victims and so on. So there was a lot of what Rene Girard called sacred violence, because they didn't have access to the psychoanalytic knowledge that this stuff is all an inner drama. And this needs to be done internally. And so now, for the first time in human history, we have the kind of understanding of the psyche through which we can take some of these projections back. And in principle, it's possible for us not to have to kill all sorts of people in war. In principle, it is now possible for us not to have human sacrifice through warfare. It's just that we're not using our knowledge now. What's going on in the world right now is a lot of human sacrifice. And they're acting out of very primitive formulas. That is where you have to kill enough people and spill enough blood before you can get about making peace. And that's been an ancient kind of pattern. And Rene Girard, look at Rene Girard's work on the violence and the sacred. So in other words, all these people that romanticize indigenous cultures and think we got to go back to that, not on your life. We've got to learn to live with other tribes, all of the tribes. And we've got to learn respect, and we've got to get all this stuff in a form of consciousness that we can take responsibility for it. That's the only hope. That's why this kind of gnosis that we're talking about today is so important. And we don't know how many people need to get this gnosis before it spreads through the human species, like the 100th monkey theory. But all that you can do, or all I can do, is to try to wake up to this and do this sacrificial process inside, so we don't have to sacrifice anybody else outside. Does that make sense? And you see, those of you who are family therapists, you see this in families all the time. The families will choose who's going to die, be the sacrificial victim in the family, the identified patient. And they're going to carry all the negative stuff to the family. So anyway, let's see how we do it. We got to get to this. That is the basic overview. Yes.
The second question that I have that similar to this is that as you're looking at these archetypes. Obviously, as you lay it out, you lay it out for both men and women,
Yes.
as both masculine and feminine.
Yes, that's right.
I'm just wondering how you distinguish and how that plays out in men versus women. Have you looked at that?
Yes, I have quite a lot, and I've talked about that a lot in my lectures. The important thing, though, is while there is and I've got creating some diagrams now for this theory book I'm working on to show this. There is statistically, there's a lot of evidence that for example, females are flooded with a lot of archetypal lover energy first half of life, usually, statistically. Males are usually flooded with aggression early in life, statistically. Mm-hmm. And then at midlife, it switches. And men are from Mars and women are from Venus first half of life. John Gray's right about that. But after midlife, he's totally wrong. Women are from Mars. Men are from Venus in the second half of life. And they cross like that, ships passing in the night, and that's why there's so many divorces at midlife. Because they're entering different archetypal compulsions. And but when you're working with an individual at any time in life, forget that. Because you have to look at the individual you're dealing with, and it doesn't matter. You look and you see, okay, where are they being flooded now? Where are they splitting off, dissociating the awareness of the other energy? And we'll get into some examples of this in a minute. So anyway, dragon signs. We're gonna get into thinking about your own now. The ones I've described here can be personality disorders, meaning a recurrent pattern in your personality which limits your ability to function in a whole way. Just a second. They can be symptoms. They can be, for example, cyclothymia. They can be dysthymia. It can be an anxiety disorder. Anytime you get an anxiety disorder, you're seeing dragon sign. That's that the person's not regulating that energy very well. Compulsions of various kinds. They will manifest if you're lucky enough to be able to remember and work with your dreams. There's a lot of dragon talk in dreams, and you just got to realize that contrary to other schools of thought, those dreams are not just about your personal unconscious. If you are listening, and if you make it very clear to the great other in the psyche that you're interested in hearing what it has to say, it will often talk to you through the dreams. And synchronistic experiences. Whenever Jung believed that whenever you have a synchronistic experience, you should pay attention, because that means that you're in pretty close proximity, psychically speaking, to the archetypal self at that time, and there's something you should be paying attention to. You're getting this is meaningful for you. You've got to figure out why this synchronistic experience is happening right now. And then, of course, there are others. A couple other questions, and then, yes, go ahead.
I got the impression that, I can't remember which of the books you did, the King Warrior Local Edition.
Right.
Where you indicate at the bottom of the pyramid, there's a positive and a negative pole.
Yes.
And that if one fails to reconcile that tension, there's a kind of ping pong effect.
Yes, right.
I wonder, is that possible, that same kind of slingshot effect happen between quadrants?
Oh, yes.
Can you move between a king and a lover?
Yes. If you're familiar with the borderline personality disorder, they wobble through the quadrants. Their system self is sufficiently unconsolidated that they are not. You see, if you become a personality disorder, that's good news, because that means you've got some structuralization in your self system. And you're not wobbling all over the place. If you're borderline, you're sort of wobbling through the quadrants. And so, one of the one of the ways to know you're dealing with a borderline personality, or perhaps you are one, is that you're so changeable. You're protean. 1 minute you're feeling all your dependency needs, and the next minute you like to blast them all with your phaser. The next minute you're having you think you've had an Gnostic initiation, and the next minute you are trying to control everybody and everything around you. And so it's wobbling through the quadrants. And that is simply a sign that the system self is in bad trouble and needs external containment. You get my drift there? But so in other words, if you're a personality disorder, if you're sort of a dependent personality type, that's progress, because you're kind of structured. You got to figure out why you're structured that way and then do something about it. But at least you're structured, you're not wobbling, etc. So anyway, yes, Bob. And then let's see how we do it. We're gonna.
Somewhere along the line, term punitive superego.
Yeah.
And that would be a very different superego than Freud in that. That's almost a definition, because that Freud was out of the parental or societal, whatever you call them. Or do I understand what you meant by that?
Well, what I'm just saying, that Freud didn't understand the actual psychological structures underlying what he observed, that he called the punitive superego. He thought that it resulted from internalization of civilizational prescriptions or parental prescriptions or whatever. And certainly the interaction of the culture and the parents do have some role in the integration of internalized controls. That's not the sick superego, though. I mean, what Freud talking about, that punitive superego, he's talking about the superego that's attacking you and trying to cut you to bits, not really regulating you, just trying to kill you. And that would be, all I'm saying is that when you're disrespectful to this great self, it will become adversarial. And it will appear adversarial. It will manifest in an adversarial way to you. Your ego will experience it as an adversary. Now, I don't think the archetypal self, I personally don't think it has changed its countenance. But I think when an ego closes up, it closes up its awareness of that great presence. I think it experiences adversarial energy. So anyway, what I'd like you to do for a minute, we've got about an hour and a half. What I'd like you to do is to find a partner for a few minutes. I'd like you to, now I don't want you to confess or share anything that you're going to go home and say, oh my God, what did I tell that person? So, we got to have a little boundaries here, a little differentiation. But I'm sure most of you can, if you scan your experience, you can discern some kinds of probable dragon signs in your life that would. There are tremendous resources available to you through the archival holdings of the Institute and its bookstore and its tape library and CD library. And you can get that list of all the stuff that's available on my work. It's a body of work, and it's designed and means to be seen as a whole. And so I welcome you to look into it and give some study to this, because it's really not a massa confusa. That is to say, the psychic geography is really not
simply a mass of confusion. There are structures in it, and there are maps by which you can navigate this and get a sense for what you need to study and what you need to learn. So I encourage you to do that. I also wanted to do a little commercial. If you have friends who are interested in my work, who are therapists, spiritually oriented, I have decided that I want to spend my time, in the time I have left, trying to teach therapists that understand that spirituality is important, because those are the ones that I think have a chance of helping people. The therapists that are flatlanders, I just pray that they do as little damage as possible. But the ones that I want to try to work with until I can't work anymore are the ones that understand that spiritual practice should be in a dynamic creative partnership with integrative psychotherapy. And I'm going to be giving and am now giving a series of seminars on my structural psychoanalysis and integrative psychotherapy. And I suggested before you go, if you have somebody you'd like to tell about that, they can get information about it on my website, or get the address and phone and email number off of this brochure. And I'd appreciate it if there's enough interest. I'll try to teach a series of those for therapists. Now let's open up the floor, and I hope you have got some questions that we can discuss now about this stuff. Were you able to discern? And again, don't share anything that you're going to go home and feel like you did a striptease about, but tell us about some hypothetical person and a question you have with regard to discerning dragon energies and regulating them and so forth. That's just, we've got about an hour now to dialogue, so let's open the floor up. Yes, back here.
I have this friend who is a really bad week, but it's all physical.
Say it again.
A lot of bruising, it's all physical.
I see. Mm-hmm.
She fell off a ladder and her head. Okay. And it all happened in a period of 3 days. I lost her feeling. Is that what's happening on the shoulder?
Could be a synchronistic kind of event. One of the things that people that I work with, I tell them, if things start going really well, that's a good time to start really paying attention to your driving and being careful how you step off of curbs. And because when things are going really well, we tend to kind of fill up with some of this archetypal energy. And if you're not too good at sort of practicing the presence yet, that's a real good time for an accident. And I've noticed that people will tend to have accidents of some kind, especially when things have gone really well. Things go really well, they'll lock their car keys in the car at the time they have to be to an important meeting. Some sort of paraphraxis like that. We call it a Freudian slip, but it's a Jungian slip, in this case. But you don't want to overinterpret such things, but if one has a series of sort of strange accidents or negative events that are clearly not causally related in some external sense, it's certainly a call to a heightened awareness, trying to get a sense of what is really constellated now, what kind of, as the Hillmanians sometimes say, what image am I in? What archetypal image am I in now? What is it that I need to be paying attention to? So there are opportunities to raise questions about, am I paying attention? Is there some way that I'm asleep at the wheel? And usually there is.
some way that we're asleep at the wheel. And again, you don't want to overinterpret it because you got to keep a sense of humor. Feelings fall out, and we fall off of ladders. But it's always a good idea if you have more than one accident in close proximity, you need to pay attention. You're zoning out some way.
Would that have any relationship?
We could have a relationship to probably any of the quadrants, and what you'd have to think about is, can one discern any typical patterns of where one tends to connect with archetypal power? Like, for example, in my life, I spent at least 40 years and more just sort of possessed with the magician archetype. You know, just shooting up with magician energy, you know. And it took me a long time in analysis to realize how that archetypal invasion of the archetypal magician has sort of deformed my life. And I have had to do a lot of analytical work and a lot of work in groups of very honest, confronting people to try to get me to kind of be more of a human being. Because if you're possessed with one of these archetypes, you're an archetype. You're not very human. And it's a lot easier to be an archetype than it is to be a human. Being a human, that's what's hard. Because you've got to kind of create a space for a human. And so the main thing you just want to say is put your radar on scan and try to figure out where are you hooking up to the archetypal energy. Do you have a thought?
I'm really busy in my life, and when they were discussing, you just said, well, it sounds like you're paying attention to the body.
Mm-hmm. If you're really busy, you have a lot of warrior. Or it has you. And if the warrior in you has you and you're a little bit workaholic, then in your shadow is the body. And you don't notice when it gets tired. It gets tired. It's tired of going. And it's the lover. And it wants to be here now. If some of my good friends tease me, they say, Robert, you'll know when you're individuating, when you're better at hanging out with friends. This is true. This is true. Yeah.
When you said when you're real busy, couldn't that be also if you have too much of a lover? You said that the lover for somebody's always thinking about the others, not being able to say no.
Well, there can be a combination in a personality where one is sort of giving away power a lot to the other. For example, a compulsive personality disorder often combines, the conscious personality and the conscious ego place for a compulsive personality disorder is kind of the lover, very much of a pleaser. But they also have a lot of that warrior stuff on automatic, and they just work all the time trying to please everybody. That would be an example of what you're talking about. But the person that's really, really dominated by lover energy is not real busy. They look lazy. They don't understand doing. Doing is the realm of warrior energy. A lot of the time, your most dysfunctional clients are people who have a real hard time doing anything. And that's why when you try to get them to do something constructive to help them pull themselves together, they don't follow through.
you know. So the phenomenon you're talking about would be something very typical in a compulsive personality disorder, which has too much dependency on the other, not enough autonomy, and also a lot of doing in order to please. It's what the Adlerians call a pleaser, personality combination, pleaser and controller. Yeah.
Then how would you correct the way you described it? Sounds like both of the quadrants.
Yeah, that's true. They are. You can understand this. One of these days I'll have somebody with computer graphics that'll be really good at showing how these things form and deform, visually, geometrically. But you can be sure if one of the quadrants is flooded and is having a disproportional influence, all the other quadrants are misshapen. That's just physics. And what you want to do in this case, one of the things about it's quite clear, say take a compulsive personality disorder. They are afraid of their own archetypal agenda that would lead them to have autonomy. They're very afraid of it. And they're also very afraid of taking control of their own aggression. Now they use a lot of that aggressive energy in doing to please others, but they haven't claimed it for themselves. They're very afraid of it. And so for a compulsive to get better, they have to start putting more energy into the royal I. Get clear what I want, not what you want, what I want. And get a sense, this is in Theodore Milan's work. I do a lot of comparison and contrast of my work with the evolutionary psychologist and a scientific psychopathology specialist, Theodore Milan. He's come up with a system that's uncannily parallel to mine from totally empirical studies. But he works very similar. And he would say that what he calls a compulsive personality, a passive ambivalent. And by that he means that they don't claim their autonomy. They don't claim enough selfhood for themselves. And they have a lot of unconscious rage about that. Now, if you've got unconscious rage, you need to start being proactive. It's the only way to deal with unconscious rage. Yeah, Mary?
The thing about, I appreciate this whole structure, but I'm thinking about myself and people I live with, about how do you actually move into relationship with this power that needs to manifest in another quadrant. And my sense of it is you can't, it's not useful to demonize the sort of functioning quadrant.
Oh, absolutely.
But it's kind of like backing into, without getting yourself freaked out, into the quadrant that is not homeland for you.
That's right.
For example, a lot of women who want to write and publish, and basically have been raised in a culture that says you're not allowed to speak.
Right.
Well, how do you back into that without freaking yourself out?
Right.
And so
that's a good way to say it, actually.
Yeah.
Back into it.
Because if you try to go into the archetypal energy around it is so not yours that you can't really.
Yeah, it feels ego alien.
Yeah, you have to sneak in. So sort of like writing articles is better than a book.
Oh yeah. You know? Oh yeah.
So you at least get yourself.
Baby steps, they say in 12-step programs.
But then it also might mean too that if a man is caught in lover energy, he doesn't want to reject his own powerful lover energy.
No.
But to build on that and to move into warrior stuff again in a backing in way.
Baby step. Okay. Right. Exactly.
No, there's a very important point Mary's making, and the point goes like this. If you're a therapist or a healer or if you're working with yourself, what do we want to do? We want to depathologize it all. We want to start out, we want to depathologize it. We don't want to follow the way we've been taught in schools of professional psychology to pigeonhole and pathology. What we want to do is to understand, what is this energy for that is flooding? And so I will, if I'm working with somebody that's had a terrible problem with addiction, I will congratulate them on their incredible amount of lover energy. I'll say, I wish I had your amount of lover energy. It would help my personality, but I don't have it. So I have to admire your lover energy. And then you maybe need to find someone who is really disciplined warrior. And you need to admire them. And you need to recognize that if you work at it baby steps, the fancy psychoanalytic word is microstructuralization. It just means baby steps. That's what they say, we say in self-psychology, microstructuralization. And I tell all my students, any real structuralization is a microstructuralization. Because if you think you're making really big changes, it's smoke and mirrors. Why? My friends, all the recent research shows that we are rewiring the brain. You don't rewire the brain fast. You rewire get this now, you rewire the brain by consistently creating the new habit pattern. Time after time after time. And I love what Mary said about backing into it, because that's got that sense of humility. You're recognizing that you're not going to get, Robert Moore is not going to become a star athlete this week. Yeah. I might, however, get up enough discipline to spend 30 minutes on the treadmill. That would be a baby step, you see. Burn off a few of those calories that my flooding lover would like to put on me because I never met a food I did not like. Right. And so, but see, you get a little sense for that. But you got to understand, when you engage in trying to bring this new energy in that's been sort of dissociated in your personality, each time you do any enactment which honors that energy, however small, if you're doing it consciously, you are actually creating new neural connections in your brain. Literally. You're creating a new brain. You've got some bad code in there. And as our technology people tell us, you've got to splice some good code in over that in order to get the thing working better. And you do that with these small but conscious steps. Other people that had insights in their dialogue about how the dragon juice manifests and the dragon energy, the dragon sign manifests. Anybody else can tell us a little something? We still got some time. Or a question about someone you know?
I was wondering about erotic obsessive thinking. You talked about compulsion, but certainly that's got to be into our psychoenergy.
Yeah.
How would you conceptualize it within this?
We're flooding erotic energy in the lover sector. The lover quadrant is primal portal for the dragon energy to come in, and this is related to Tillich's thought on the question he always asks about how does a person encounter the power of being that gives them juice to live. Well, it's not all over the place. It's somewhere. I always ask my students, I say, where is it in you? Where do you get the juice? You get it from somewhere. Where do you get it?
Some people get it from relationships. Some people get it in erotic fantasies, going into internet porn. They get all juiced up with the internet porn. Other people get it by doing incredibly strenuous exercise, and it comes in through the warrior sector that way. Very different forms for different people, but you got to ask the question: where does that energy come in? Some people get it by looking at art. Tillich was one of the first to really notice this, that there are a lot of people whose experience of the numinous, the sacred energies, comes through the encounter with art, not through anything that's overtly religious whatsoever. But what you got to understand is when a person gets the energy, when that energy comes in through the art, that is dragon energy. And it's coming in through that particular sacramental portal. And so you would look at that obsessional preoccupation with erotic imagery. It's a flooding of lover energy, flooding of archetypal energy through that lover thing. And the person needs help in finding other archetypal elements to put in the mix, because too much of that will make one very chaotic. Yeah. In fact, borderline personalities are really flooded with a lot of erotic energy. Yeah.
I'm an archetype, so that means it seems very natural for me to be energized by an art museum, opera, classical music, or whatever. Now the question is that kind of innately my big garage door that will always be the portal, and then I have to kind of channel that energy to other areas? Or is it a matter of getting one of those 4-door garages that I can access energy in other ways?
The goal, of course, see, there's too many people that want to be, like the guy that found Steve chord, and he says everybody else is looking for it, and I found one chord, Johnny one note. There are people that say find your myth. I think that's absolutely terrible advice. And I think it's terrible advice for people to put too much emphasis on typology, psychological typology, because if you get the idea you are a ... that is a box. Now we have to be realistic. Robert Moore is likely to hook up with a magician archetype a lot for the rest of his life. That's right. But the great promise for me in my individuation is to actually go to the things that are harder for me, because if I'm right in what I've understood in this theory, my capacity to function cognitively will not get worse, it will get better if I bring in the other energies. So in other words, the capacity to optimize what you're already good at, it goes up if you bring in the shadow. It doesn't get worse. We have an idea that there's psychic zero-sum game going on, when in fact that's wrong. Your optimum is really quite greater than you think it is. And the way to have a chance during your lifetime, that's what I mean by the ecstatic life. Tillich really believed that ecstasy is really something that's always an ever-present possibility for humans to live. It's hard, you can't stay in it all the time, but I actually believe that if you move towards your optimum, you can get more in the zone more of the time, and be more in your own creativity more of the time. And the way for you to get there is to try to bring in these parts of your self system, get them more consolidated so it can hold more energy. And then say your aesthetic capacities, which are already, for example, quite high compared to other people. But you got to remember that if you bring in the consolidation of the system integrity of your self system, it can stand more intensity without getting weird. That means that you can stand a lot more ecstatic artistic encounter. That's something that might be attractive. Yes, right here.
Can you relate your theoretical structure to eating disorders?
To eating disorders? It's quite clear that we need to think about eating disorders in the context of archetypal intrusions. And that's a whole area of, there have been people doing some work on that, but I think it would be very important to give some deep reflection on how that is in fact structured archetypally. I'm not prepared to make a summary comment on that now, but any compulsive behavior, take it to the bank, is being fueled by intrusions, colonizations, archetypal colonizations. And so the research challenge would be to look carefully at this, look carefully at the archetypal energies and figure out what kind of archetypal form is this that's taking over this person. But that's the rule. All compulsive behavior is simply an archetypal colonization. And whatever form it takes. If you look closely at it, it'll tell you something about what archetypal sector it's coming out of. Other comments and questions about your experience with archetypal energy or somebody's experience with archetypal. Go ahead.
What about an obsession with knowledge? Obsession with learning.
Obsession with learning. Clearly, that's an overheated magician possession state. And again, it's the same thing he was saying. You don't want to pathologize that. You want to say, gee, isn't knowledge wonderful? And of course it is. And you can't get enough of it. I was driving up the drive today thinking, oh my God, I haven't studied enough Plato. And so I laughed when I heard myself saying that to myself. I laughed, I said, oh boy, yeah, in my copious spare time, I'm going to study. I'm going to go back and study, the Timaeus, But that's a joyful thing. You got to keep a sense of humor about that. But one has to look at the things that one is, if one is so into knowledge like that, and one has got to ask what is conspicuously absent from one's life. And that's how you tell what's dissociated. You can also ask, what are you asking your friends and your spouse to carry for you? Your close friends or your spouse. What energy are you expecting them to provide for you? Because that's usually a dissociated archetypal energy that you're not feeling comfortable with. Yes, go ahead.
I have a question. Something you touched on a little while ago, and I see it in my own life and with people I work with. And that is the part where you were saying things are going really well, and then watch out. Is it that during those times when things are going really well, we begin to identify, and so we need something to bring us back?
Well, unfortunately, yeah. The hubris, it's the hubris nemesis thing. And of course, I don't think that's necessary. I mean, I think what we've got to do is to realize that if you can cultivate, I was thinking about this the other day, it's very hard to maintain your grandiosity if you're having enough of a sense of gratitude. They are completely antithetical to each other. So, in fact, someone told me, I'm not a great fan of John Calvin, but I have a friend who is a really wonderful scholar of John Calvin. He said, there's this book by Bernard McGinn, in which he talks about Calvin's theory of worship in the Eucharist, and he pointed out that it's called grace and gratitude. And it's if you have a real sense of grace, meaning dragon energy. If you really are conscious about it, you will have a sense of gratitude. So I'm trying, you got to help me with this. I'm trying to compile a list of little aphorisms that I can have a little book, a little book on grandiosity, and it'll say, you know you're grandiose when. One of them is, you know you're grandiose when you don't have a plan B and a plan C. Well, then I thought, wow, gee, that means you know you're grandiose when you don't have a feeling of gratitude. And I think that's right. So when things are going very well, that's a real good time to find ways to become very conscious of your gratitude for the grace that you're experiencing, the blessing you're experiencing in your life, because it might not be that way. Like, to the extent that you have any health at all, it's good to cultivate a sense of gratitude for that, and so on. So that's an important kind of thing. And see, that's that sacrificial attitude, because in that sacrificial practice, spiritual practice, you're trying to say, thank you. I really appreciate it. I'm trying to show you that I appreciate it. And so that would be important. So we want good things to happen to you, but when good things happen to you, it's a good thing to cultivate, as my African American students say, an attitude of gratitude. Yeah.
I was interested in the fourth example, the moving into more the ecstatic
Yes.
life. And I, like you, can be like Icarus and love to fly high, but then fall and don't like the earth.
Right. Magician types really don't like the earth much. They've got to learn to love the world.
And what I have found, a lot of my spiritual training has been with contemplative.
Yeah.
And the sense of sitting. And I have found that levels me out, that helps me to be in what I call the zone.
Be still.
Yeah. And to be in a more even sense. So could you speak to that?
Sure.
Practice.
Yeah.
That helps that evening, and also helps us to listen, to be able to hear, in that realm.
Sure. I think that's a very good comment. It's, if you have a lot of that magician energy in you, you tend to sort of get out of body. You tend to kind of rise. It's kind of that contemplation, that contemplative thing. A lot of the time, if you're sort of too much flooding with magician stuff, as most therapists are, most analysts, most professors, we're kind of the worst on this. Self-style mystics and so on. They tend to kind of rise up out of the body. And so certain forms of meditation and sitting and being still, trying to get in the still point, there's a sense in which that does get you sort of quieted down, grounded, and out of being so impressed with your thoughts. Because in a lot of sitting meditations, they teach you just not get invested in the thoughts, just to be there, be centered in your body. And so I think that's a good comment. Different things help different people, though. You've really got to find the practices that help you get grounded and centered and still, so that you can open up to what it is that's not been present. Mary, you were going to say something.
I had a couple thoughts, actually, and one was about the artistic process. It's sort of like an orgasm. You can't go after greatness directly. It's a disaster. It's just like being in love with that archetype. And I work with a lot of artists, and when their work is going well, they get very grandiose, and when their work isn't going well, they're just devastated. They have no other object relation in their lives. They don't have a relationship. They don't have a home. They've sacrificed everything for art. And of course, that's the model that's presented in the culture. And there's really being a really good artist. And that's what's promoted in art schools. I mean, the whole thing is really unbalanced. And their art then becomes about itself. And it's a ripping off of the unconscious. One of the most disastrous things that can happen is when they bring their work in and we start relating to it as something coming from the dragon energy, because then it's not from their ego. It's a communication. And they don't want to know about communication, right? So all those things are all about this sort of aesthetic overdrive. And it's all about, Jung said this too, the great stuff that Jung said about that you need both understanding and aesthetics. And that if you have aesthetics without understanding, I forget exactly what he said, you have just beauty. And if you have just understanding without the aesthetics, you have sort of like dull.
That's right.
But you need a combination of both understanding and aesthetics.
Mm-hmm. Thank you. Thank you. I think a lot of artists need help in finding ways for themselves to get contained in their human existence, as some people say, get a life, and so that then they can be a more respectful vessel for the creativity that comes in. And so that's exactly
they get a life. Their
right.
work then suddenly takes
Right.
on a greater solidity.
Right. Right. And let me just share a couple of things. You want to pay a lot of attention to what we talked about earlier, whether you feel that you don't really have access to archetypal energy much of the time, or you need to pay attention to whether or not you feel that you are sort of driven a lot, because different people experience this differently, and depending on whether you have a surplus, or whether you have a sense of being alienated from the archetypal energy, that really matters about how you'd want to try to work with this. So you need to give some thought to that. Other things that came up during your dialogues that you might share with us that might be helpful to other people. Yeah. Go ahead.
Well, the idea of psychomania is something that I was sharing with you between your discussions about how being a therapist, some of my colleagues had mentioned that they were beginning to think they were bipolar because they would have these periods of just feeling ecstatic and then dropping down into the depths. And of course, we're carrying a lot of the archetypal energy for the people that we're seeing, as well as whatever's going on with us.
Right.
So how do you balance that out when you're not experiencing those, tremendous peaks and valleys?
Well, there again, she's asking about when somebody is working with other people a lot, where the other people are carrying a big charge, and then you come away having a lot of their charge as well as your charge, and you're all revved up, and you may be sort of all aglow for a while and then crash. That's what you say. Well, in my Facing the Dragon book, I talk about how in the idealizing transferences that you'll get as any leader, whether you're a teacher, whether you're a spiritual director, or whether you're a pastor, any leadership position, or even in friendships where people idealize you, pay attention to people's idealizations of you. And also pay attention to your idealizations of other people, because that's all archetypal transferences of some kind. You need to start asking what that is, because that's always going on.
You need to be awake about it. But in your leadership role or therapeutic role, you've got to realize that you are going to be having a lot of that idealizing, putting these dragon energies into you for you to hold for people. And it's going to make you crazier. And that's all the more reason why it's very important for a person doing any kind of therapeutic work or leadership work to be able consciously to recognize when you're over-revved by these idealizations, and then try to go into your inner temple consciously and try to have conversations with the dragon about this. I know this is not my energy. I know this is your energy. And I would like to do something which symbolizes that to you. Maybe you will think of something you need to do which you would not do ordinarily, but which you may do. For example, you've been needing all week to go to the gym and work out. And you've been blowing it off. So that's a good idea anyway. But if you're working on this fellowship with the dragon, you can say, you know what, I've got all this energy and I'm going to go put it into something constructive in a ritual to honor you. And what is your ritual that day? Your ritual is consciously going to the gym, saying to the dragon, this is your energy. I'm going to offer it to some agenda that I know you would like. You would like me to be a human. You know that I'm a human and not a dragon. So I'm going to go be a human to honor you. So you go to the gym, you get that energy put into the treadmill or the weights or some such thing. And that, if you're not on an exercise program and using that as a part of your spiritual practice, you're missing a lot. And you should consider it because it works. Yes.
I've been doing some training with Rosalie Briere, and I don't know if you're familiar with her energy work, but she talks a lot about the importance of being very well-rounded, and in areas where you tend to be shy, to really extend yourself, to try and balance yourself out that way. And she also talks very much about all of these different aspects in order to be a vessel of energy work to bring about healing and the importance of that.
She's right.
And even in terms of the exercise component, in terms of having a strong physical structure in order to be able to do that. And I find it very interesting because this whole idea of the ecstatic life and communing with the dragon, I've worked a lot with the elemental forces on my own over the years, and I understand, your discussion about the inner temple and the balancing of that, and also in terms of some of the practices that you've talked about. I'm just curious in terms of your own practices, like some of your own practices that you tend to keep, that keep these things in a balance check for yourself. And obviously the sacrificial part is something that you speak very highly of. And I was just wondering if you could expand on that.
Yeah, the challenge, and it's not easy, but the real challenge is to work toward a way of being in your day from the moment you wake up, from the very moment that your eyes open. I think that the optimal goal, which is not easy to attain, is to greet the dragon immediately upon awakening and envision a day in communion with it. And there's a way in which, if you're actually trying to live a synchronistic life and practice the presence, you're not going to think of the dragon once during the day and that's it.
Because when that ego closes up and you're in a fantasy of being alone, it has just become arrogant. So, we've got to look at the practice of those people in different traditions who have understood all this. And there's no one magical exercise or one magical discipline. It's really about practicing the presence. And it can be expressed in everything you do during the day. Absolutely everything you do during the day. And so what I try to do is I simply read between the lines in Jung and I read between the lines in Edinger. Those are the people that I think understand this best in terms of psychology. And I seek to kind of live in that kind of awareness of the presence of the archetypal self as much as possible during the day, from awakening until sleep. And the way it works in my practice is I try never to let myself fantasize myself alone in the room with an analysis with an analysis patient. I'm never alone in that room with an analysis. The dragon is always there. And if I don't know that, I'm inflated. And I'm also trying to do it by myself and be the all-important therapist. And that's an inflated therapist. And not too much good is likely to come to that. But if you're attempting, and everything you do, from your exercise program to your participation in certain symbolic rituals that you're aware of, everyone needs to learn about that sort of thing and find the right practice for themselves. And since there is no one right symbolic language, because all of them are inadequate, you have to find some that you're conversant with and comfortable with. You have to understand that they're not the last word, but they are vessels for you. They are, I'm a Protestant, and I utilize the imagery of Mary to help me connect with the royal feminine. A man, in my view, for example, that doesn't have some practice with the goddess is a man who's likely to put that on a woman, a human woman. Amen. And it should not ever be put on a human woman. And by the same token, in my dragon book, I say you need to have a sense of your relationship to the royal couple within, because if you don't have a sense of the relationship to them within, you're going to project them on persons in the outer world, and it's going to make trouble, big time trouble. So I do a lot of things. I use a lot of archetypal images. There are a lot of therapists that are kind of cute Freudians. They think that if they don't have any images in their office, that creates a sort of neutral environment. That's the biggest joke I ever heard of, because an imageless office is very stark and creates a lot of form demand. We call it form demand in psychology. So, I put images in my office which represent the transpersonal. And it reminds me when I'm practicing that I'm not it. And so I do a lot of things. I'm very aware of ritual symbols and ritual practices. And I try to use them. I'm always trying to learn something. But the important thing I would just underscore for you, you need your own idiosyncratic, tailor-made, it's been made specifically for you, integrated treatment plan, spiritual and psychological treatment plan. It needs to be integrated. It needs to include the body. It needs to include the mind. It needs to include some sense of your own vision and your service. It needs to include
significant activity. It needs to be a holistic plan, consciously and intentionally formed. And so when I say you need to understand the importance of doing some sort of spiritual discipline in conjunction with the psychological work you do, because the psychology itself, the scientific psychology, can only talk about the plumbing. It cannot actually give you all the symbolic vessels. For example, anyone trying to use Jungian psychology for a religion, it doesn't make a good religion. It needs to be used as a way of understanding what religion is for and why it's important, why religious practice is important. So, yes.
I don't think you've come right out and say this, but I want to clarify.
Okay.
You say that you're in the room and you call on the dragons.
I'm aware, yes. I try to constantly be aware of that, because if I'm not, there's a tendency for the therapist to really get inflated.
My question is that the same thing as calling on God, the Holy Spirit?
If you're a very spiritual person, it would be a different language for the same phenomenon. As a scientist, you're not making ontological claims. I mean, I can talk about these in any languages, but Jung was this revolutionary researcher who came to the understanding that there is a phenomenology of God, and it is a presence. It is a presence, and it can be looked at scientifically. If you're looking at it scientifically, you're talking about deep structures in the psyche, the God imago. You're not making any ontological philosophical claims as a scientist. Scientists can't do that. However, human beings are wired for the mythic imagination, and human beings are going to, if they're intellectually honest, they're going to have to do philosophy. Because Tillich was right about that. You can't avoid thinking philosophically. You just do it. And if you don't think you're doing it, you're making some secular ideology into a philosophy. So in any case, the important thing is to recognize that there's some consciousness in the room other than your own ego consciousness. And it has more wisdom than you. And it's important. That's the fundamental Jungian understanding. It's important for there to be a conscious relationship between the ego and as Edinger says, look at that little book, The Science of the Soul. Look at the chapter in there. There's one most important chapter to read, the one called The Greater Personality. That's what I'm talking about. There's a greater personality in you, and it knows more than you. It knows more about the patient than you, and it's important to be in dialogue with. Yeah.
Can a dragon? This is not a question, but it occurs to me as you're talking. Can the dragon want you to be a dragon? Is that what you mean by optimal personality?
Sometimes it looks like the dragon wants you to be a dragon because it possesses you. I don't really think that's its agenda. I think if it has to possess you to get your attention, that happens all the time. My guess is, Edinger says this, Jung indicates it everywhere. I think they're right. I think it wants a relationship with you. I don't even think it's neutral about it. I think there's some mystery about it. It wants a relation. It wants to be known. It does all sorts of things. If you just study Jung and Edinger in very great detail, it does all sorts of things to try to get your attention. Gives you these weird dreams, these weird accidents, these weird synchronicities, these symptoms you can't ignore, and the more you ignore it,
the more it escalates. That looks like it has an agenda. It wants something. What's my best guess? It would like a relationship, an ongoing relationship. It's very interesting to work with. I do a lot of work with people on this, in which I simply try to provide a space for them to do active imagine dialogues with this thing. I found it's amazing how well it works with people, for example, who are militant atheists and whose very militant atheism is one of the things that's harming their life because they're having a struggle to find any meaning, because they're so sure there isn't any.
They're mad at God.
No, they're not mad at God. They don't believe there is a God, and they just are having a real struggle with what Tillich calls the anxiety of fate and death and the anxiety of emptiness and meaninglessness. But I say, okay, I don't care whether you believe in God or not, but I want you to have these active imagined dialogues with your greater personality. And you will notice once you start to do this that it talks back. And it will not be long until you know that it's not you talking. So they begin to do active imagination dialogues with the greater personality, whatever you call it. Give it your own name, I don't care. In fact, it will sometimes give you its own name. And what immediately happens is things start getting better for the person as they begin to have this dialogue. And I'm really quite amazed at all these good things. I don't really do much. I don't have much to do with it. I just create the space and I invite them to start engaging in communication with the greater personality and to keep up with their dialogues, be respectful and write them down. And it's amazing what unfolds. And I recommend that you try that. Try active imagination dialogues doing this. Because what I've noticed is that as a person does these active imagination dialogues, it's just like Jung and Edinger said. I mean, it's amazing. It's just like Jung said and like Edinger says in all of his work. If you make the effort to try to form a relationship, after an initial period of sort of suspicion of your motives, whether you're really serious, a cooperative thing begins to form between you and this, what some of the people I work with call their inner friend. And it's really quite astounding to just witness the relationship that begins to form and the things that are said back and forth. And it's not me. I don't come up with it. But it's a lot wiser than I am. Yeah.
You know, many of the spiritual writers, like Thomas Merton, they talk a lot about the true self versus the false self.
Yes.
Now, the way I'm picking up today, the true self is not really this archetypal self in us, because that is much greater than even.
That's right.
Yes. Now, how would you connect then true self?
The true self is your authentic human self. It is not an inflated, arrogant, archetypally dominated being. It is a fully human, radiant creature who can love and love the particular. I mean, it's a finite human being who's going to die. And you can tell that your true self, that you are your true self in Merton's sense, and in the sense of anyone else that talks about that in a meaningful way. You know, you face your mortality. You see, when you're not facing your mortality, and you know, this is very hard to face your mortality. This is a big challenge to realize you're going to die. And And as you begin to deal with your mortality, you become more human. You actually become more human, because as long as you're not dealing with immortality, you're in a grandiose fantasy. You're going to live forever. You're not going to get sick. Your spouse is not going to die. You know, you're bulletproof, and nothing bad can happen to me. And you take another one of those. How do you know when you're grandiose? You know you're grandiose when you take anything for granted. You know. So that true self he's talking about, that's a human. But it's not some little dumbed down, flat, nothing human. It's really it's a wonder. A human being that can really get incarnated and be a human being is really a magnificent being. But they're a creature. And it's the very finitude and very shortness of their life ought to help us recognize how precious it is. See? So I think you're absolutely right. You're reading it right. The archetypal self is what I call the great self or the God self. The system self is an actual internal structure that you create in order to be able to be a human, to affirm your humanity.
And is the true self similar to the system self?
Well, it's the true self is that, you know, is what emerges in your human personhood when that system self is functioning adequately, and you've gotten able to disavow your merger with the God self. And see, the paradox is as you get over your fusion in whatever form it takes with the God self, you become actually more wonderful. You don't become less wonderful. As you become less archetypal and more human, you're actually more wonderful. That's what people fear. They fear if they stop being archetypal, they won't be wonderful. But you know, being possessed by an archetype, that's really flat and one-sided. Being an archetype isn't nearly as whole as a person. Do you know what I mean? A person is a magnificent, radiant integration of incredible complexity. They're not a flat archetype. See? So that true self Merton's talking about is that wonderful, radiant human self. Yeah.
Why do you think that certain archetypes tend to dominate more than, or basically?
Why does that happen? I think that you just look at the way this works in families. Family, when you come into the world, in fact, Theodore Milan believes, and I think he's right, that the way you come in embodied tends to have something to do with the way he says it. He says it in that learning theory kind of way. He says how you get embodied has something to do with how you choose to be reinforced. Well, what that means is, you know, if, for example, if you come in with a very powerful body, you're likely to constellate an archetype that's much more active and dominant in its form. If you're in a very weak body, you will tend to shrink back, and you won't constellate those, you know, aggressive warrior king, warrior queen kinds of constellations. And then the family, when you get in that family, whatever archetypal space has been occupied by your sister, your older sister, or your older brother, you can't have that space. So the family will parcel out archetypal territory unknowingly to the different siblings. And so they will reward you for being a certain way, the way they want you to be. And they will give you a message in the family system. The family system will give you a message. You're not to have this particular energy. And some of the siblings will be told, you are dumb. You're the dumb one. You're the pretty one. You're the smart one. And they're really passing out. You're the one that is the assistant parent. You're to take care of everybody else. when I am not functioning well as a parent, and that sort of thing. Follow? So families parcel them out. And so there are a lot of factors that come into it, and certain life events also contribute. But I like to say to people, it doesn't matter too much how you got there. It's interesting.
Well, I'm thinking more spiritual.
Oh, I see. Uh-huh.
I'm wondering on that level.
Okay. Give me an example.
Because I'm thinking of archetypes as some sort of, greater spirit that we really sort of filter into our lives. And, I understand how family of origin can breed things and all that, but I'm thinking about in a greater spiritual realm. Why is it that they're seeing these archetypes the way they seem to want to show themselves within the home?
Well, that's a very esoteric question. That's a good place for us to stop. Let's put it this way. I mean, there's a lot of evidence that's a good question. Why do these archetypes want to manifest? Well, Jung always thought that these things want to find human embodiment. And you can think about the whole archetypal family wants to have human embodiment, and they actually fight over you. Each one of these archetypal patterns is kind of imperialistic. They want all of you. And so you've got to put Jung always felt you have to kind of push back a little bit and say, wait a minute, I'm just a human. I'm not an archetype. I can't do all that you think I can do. I have to do my best as this little human being and have empathy for the archetypes wanting to manifest in time. That's kind of in the Platonic tradition. Archetypes all want to manifest in history because you're not really very real if you haven't become embodied in history. There's a sense of that. So there's a mystery there that probably if you read Plato, we'll probably get. All right, I want to thank all of you for coming today. I really